Welcome everyone to the second and final day of the 5th SNF Conference on Philanthropy. Judging from everyone here, you found the first day interesting and we're really happy to have you back. And without further ado, because we have a very strict schedule to follow, I would like to call on stage Mr. Vasilakis, moderator of the first panel dedicated on Thessaloniki, its cosmopolitan past and visions of a cosmopolitan future. Panelists include Mayor Boutaris. Please come on stage. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. I guess Elena is right. You must have had a good time yesterday, so I see a full room, and we hope that it will remain the same throughout the day. Kalimera σας. And thank you for joining us. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Mr. Mayor, I will start with you. You came into being the mayor of a city that had a great cosmopolitan past. It's a past that has been shattered. It doesn't exist anymore. It went away a long time ago, but this is something that people keep talking about. And there is always talk, although, you know, recreating something that is post-cosmopolitan is always complicated and difficult. It's something that people keep talking about it. Can you talk a little bit, how did this occupy you as you came into becoming the mayor of the city, and how do you see the possibility of the city reenacting some of that cosmopolitan character as you move forward? And what have you tried to do in all these years that look into that direction?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Vasilakis. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Mr. Spiro Niarchos. Good morning, Mr. Dragopoulos. And I thank you once again for all of you being here. So, I have one thing in my mind. I had that in my mind always, but especially when we took over the municipality. I said that you cannot build your future unless you know your past. This is a principle I have. So, when we took over, we said, what's the past of Thessaloniki? For 2,300 years, it was always started from a small settlement in the Thermaikos Bay, and it continued for all these years with many periods of violence, of destructions, of everything. But finally, at the end of the 19th century, it was a booming city, a cosmopolitan city, second to Istanbul and the then Ottoman Empire, and a link between the East and the West. Because apart from at that time, the population of Thessaloniki was around 150,000, something like that. So there were 50,000 Jews, 30,000 Turks, another 30,000 Greeks, and another 20, 30,000 Slavs, Armenians, Italians, French, everybody. Thessaloniki was a booming spot, commercial, financial, transportation, enjoying life, everything. So after the liberation from the Ottoman Empire, if you watch this 100 years, it was full of distractions, exchange of populations, the big fire, finally, the two wars, the civil war, and finally, and the biggest blow was the Holocaust. So Thessaloniki, after the 60s, was a poor city of the province of Greece. In Athens, everything was gathered in Athens, so Thessaloniki was slowly but definitely going down and down and down. And it came up to the phase where it is today. The port is a joke compared to other ports of the Mediterranean. Transportation, no railroads, no roads, Egnatia has done something, but it's not enough yet. So what we said is that we cannot revive the past, we cannot copy the past, but we can learn from the past. So what are the treasures of Thessaloniki? Thessaloniki is a city which has very, very human dimensions. It has a treasure which is the universities, 120,000 students which walk on the streets, and you feel the energy, these young people, it's flowing around. Industry, forget about it. It's definitely moved to other places of cheap labor, cheap taxes, no taxes. So what can we do to promote this thing? Spiros and Lina, and this is a parenthesis. One thing I'm very proud of this municipality is that I gathered young people around. You see them?
Yep.
I gathered young people around, and they are very, very, not ambitious. They are dedicated to what they do. They do that because they believe in that. And they believe in that because they love the city. And I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years, but now they are so dedicated in what they do, and they do it so well, that I cannot but praise them. And this is the biggest satisfaction I have is that through the movement we had to gain the city and to overcome the conservatism of the city, was this young you see three of them, there are many more, that tried to work and bring up the past, not copy the past, but learn from the past and apply new things. This is the main thing. So, what's our vision for the future? So, first of all, the port. The port is absolutely necessary. Privatization of the port is a very good thing that happens. And let's hope that this will happen quickly. It is already, we are late in bringing out the port. And then we got, naturally, railroads and roads. And we got a big ambition. The ambition is, if we can, and we are going to push this idea, which is not a new idea. It's an idea that the old Karamalis had first initiated, connecting the Aegean Sea with the Baltic Sea through Axios River, Danube, and going up to the Baltic Sea. Now this, if it's accepted, it's not a Greek thing to do, it's a European road. If this is done, then Thessaloniki will become again a very, very important spot in the European map. So, but this is the vision for the future. And then we also try to do, apart from the thing that happened, and we must face it and face it in a good manner. The refugee crisis. We are trying to absorb the refugees that stay in the city and absorb them in the society of Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki was always named as the mother of the refugees. Apart from the mother of Israel, it's the mother of refugees. In the 90s, more than 1 million Albanians came to Greece. And nowadays, the first years, everything bad that happened in Greece was because of the Albanians. Nowadays, in Thessaloniki only, we have around 70,000 Albanians. They live well, they are good entrepreneurs, they are good workers, they are good people. Their children go to school, so the society absorbs them. Not very easily, but it absorbs them. So this is what we must do with any kind of refugees that will come. And having in mind that the whole area of the Mediterranean is in a war state, it's not easy, but we must do it. So the vision is, first of all, bringing up the port. The port will bring economic facilities. Then the universities. The universities is a huge treasure for the city. And we try to help the university, the authorities of the universities, to make the universities of Thessaloniki make it a spot where people will, students will like to come to Thessaloniki to study, whatever. It's their job to decide what they'll do. But we want to help as a municipality, because the municipality, you know, Mr. Vasilakis, the municipality does not do things. The municipality opens the doors so that things can be done by people. And this is another idea that we try to introduce to our co-citizens. We have a motto, and we try to pass to our citizens. I love my city, I adopt my neighborhood. If our citizens, if the citizens do not participate and do not, let's say, do not come to like the propositions we have, we'll fail. It's clear. Nobody, no municipality, no mayor can do anything unless the people will support it. So I don't want to catch up more of your time. I'll let the other people speak. But
a couple of more things
yeah.
To you. You talked about people getting involved with the city, and you're talking about people accepting the vision that you have about the city. And of course, there are different ways to manifest that. One of them is through the political process and by voting, but the other one is by actively participating into what you have created. And I took a walk late last night from where we are for dinner all the way down through the coastal front, and I was astonished how crowded it was very late in the evening. It remained crowded until 12:30. You could hear many different languages as you're walking up and down. And I have been here before, and it was always kind of a crowded area, but never to the extent that I saw last night. So you have managed to create a public space that existed before, but it wasn't utilized properly. And it seems to me that was one of the big things that you did, that a lot of focus went into regenerating, restructuring, renovating, refiguring that whole front so that it does become a public space. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yeah. Public space is very scarce in Thessaloniki, and not only Thessaloniki, in the whole of Greece, all the cities of Greece have not enough public space. So what we did is that we declared from the municipality council, I hate cars. And I had the other day, I had a meeting, a lady stopped me on the street, and she said to me, oh, Mayor, what are you going to do? We must do parkings and things like that. Where do I park my car? What do I do? And I said to her, look, madam, I'll give you an advice. Sell your car. If you sell your car, for the next 40 years, you'll have a taxi driver driving you all over wherever you want. You'll not have the expenses of the car, and you'll be happy. So why use it? She was like a goldfish. She couldn't answer. And believe me, I really believe in what I said to her. You don't need the car in a city like Thessaloniki. You can use the taxis, which are very, very cheap. You can use, even we have only one public means of transportation, only the buses. And they are in a very bad condition. So one of our ambitions is that energy, the green city, our ambition is to have the electric cars, buses, and all the cars of all the fleet of the municipality, more than 500 cars, all of them electric. And little by little, convince even the taxi drivers to have electric taxis. At the same time, produce electricity. Now, this is a good idea for an investor. It will pay back. The municipality doesn't have any money. It cannot do an investment like that, and it should not do an investment like that, because I'm fond of private and public cooperation. You put the money, I give you the project, you put the money, you gain back your profit, and everybody's happy. It's a win-win situation. And another thing that we have done, and Spiros will tell you more about it, what we call the diplomacy of the cities. We don't care about the political, on the political level, if we fight with Albania or Skopje or whatever. What we care is we go to the cities, we present our city, and we say we have these restaurants, these hotels, these museums, these whatever you want to do. Study in Thessaloniki is a part of the diplomacy of the cities. We go for 1 or 2 days, we present it, and we expect them to come, and they come. So this is one of the reasons. The Greeks usually say, oh, Thessaloniki is the metropolis of the Balkans. Bullshit, it's not the Balkans at all. It's a declining city. Correct. So in order to bring it back, we've got to learn from the past. What did they do? They were free, they are open to everything. They didn't have restrictions. You don't park here, you don't park there, you don't do things like that. What we feel is that we must pass this change of mentality to our people. Be free of yourselves. We had a huge fight with the church, for many reasons. And now I'm a very good friend with Archbishop. He's a very extreme person, but he's very decent and he's very clear. So I said to him when I took over, look, we're never going to be friends, but you are the religious leader of the city and I'm the political leader of the city. We've got to give the example that even if we are so opposite as we are, we cooperate for the good of the citizens. So this is part of the dream. This is part of the vision. And we open the door. We give the example to the people with things like that, so that they will start little by little to participate. Thessaloniki has a percentage, voting percentage of around 10%, the Golden Dawn. It is huge. So this must change. It doesn't change overnight. You need a lot of time.
We will talk about engaging the city's Jewish past later. We'll come to the potential of a Holocaust museum. We'll talk about it in a minute. But I wanted to ask you about your recent trip in the US, where on behalf of almost 1,500 European mayors, you signed a declaration against anti-Semitism on behalf of European mayors, which it's very important. And I wanted you to talk about a little bit about being the figure that represented the rest of the mayors of Europe. And in order to do so, you must have done certain things that show that the city is embracing something different from what you see around today. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, this is, first of all, this is a huge honor for the city and naturally for me, that I was appointed by the American Jewish Committee to address the General Assembly of the American Jewish Committee, having signed the Declaration of Anti-Racism, Anti-Zionism, and all these things. It was me from the European, about 200 European cities, 60 million people, and the mayor of Baltimore, who is the president of the American Association of Municipalities, 300 municipalities, 80 million people. So this was, I was chosen by the American Jewish Committee. I was not by the Europeans, because it was their initiative. So what we did, when we took over, it's always the same thing, know your past. Nobody knows how Thessaloniki would be if it hasn't lost 30% of its population during the Holocaust. And it was not only that it lost these 50,000 souls, it lost the most energetic part of the city. Because the Jews were rich, they were middle class, they were poor, they were everything. So, and the movement of the Jews who left Thessaloniki started just after the war, the First World War, in 1914. Most of them at that time fled to Paris. But there are, the Jewish population of Thessaloniki was so important and so big that you can, we meet people from all over the world and have they come from Thessaloniki. The writer Modiano, he comes from Thessaloniki, who got the Nobel Prize last year, literature. Sarkozy, he has his origin from Thessaloniki. Dassault, he has his origin from Thessaloniki. So this is the past. So what can we do to show to the rich people of Thessaloniki what they did for Thessaloniki, what they must do now? They must not keep their money in the pockets. They must give. You don't get your portfolio with you, your money with you when you fly up. So, and the thing is that we started again the silent march, as we call it, the march from Liberation Square to the old railroad station where the Jews were deported for Auschwitz. We went to Auschwitz, to the March of the Living, the first mayor of Thessaloniki who went to the March of the Living. And we honored 29 survivors of the Holocaust who came back to Thessaloniki. And we pushed the university and we pressed the university to erect a monument at the university campus, which has the cemetery, the Jewish cemetery, one of the oldest and one of the biggest cemeteries in Europe. And this is where the Thessaloniki has remorses that the Germans, they gave the order to vanish, the cemetery should be vanished. But it was executed by the Greeks. And this is not a very, very good thing. They could resist. Probably the cemetery would be destroyed, but you don't have to cooperate. So, and then another thing is that I wore the yellow star of David, during the inauguration. The inauguration of the second term, because we have two representatives of the Golden Dawn in there, and this was just a thing of protesting against the existence of Golden Dawn. So we did all these things, and then we came up to the idea, and Mr. Santier is here, president of the Jewish community, that we should build a museum of the Holocaust and an educational center. We are in touch with the Jewish organizations of all over the world. But the idea is not to have another Holocaust museum. We have evidence of that all over. Definitely the museum will present the city. But the idea is to present how important was the presence of the Jewish community in the 500 years that came when they came from Spain. They came to Thessaloniki in 1492, if I remember well. Yes. They came to Thessaloniki from Spain. The Jews were here in Thessaloniki. There's evidence that they were here even when Apostolos Paul came here to Thessaloniki. So it was not new. But Thessaloniki, the Ottoman Empire at the time, received them. And they were well adjusted to the environment of Thessaloniki. And this is how Thessaloniki became more than cosmopolitan.
We'll get back to the Holocaust Museum, and it's interesting to meet people all the time whose roots, I mean in the US, whose roots come from the city. I was actually very moved. Limor Tomer, who I believe is in this room, and actually is the curator of the events in Athens next week, went to a tour yesterday and found her family's name written on the wall, which was very moving. I wanted to move into something else, and that's for the rest of the team. You have...
I'll tell you, excuse me for one thing. I'll tell you one thing. That apart from the Jews, we had the exchange of populations with the Turks. I can assure you that we have many Turks coming to Thessaloniki, visiting Thessaloniki, and they try to find the houses of the old, the families of the houses, because in Thessaloniki, the Turks live in the hills, beautiful, the best place of the Jews lived, the middle class and the poor, they lived in the center of the city. The Greeks lived in the area around the Rotonda, yeah. And the rich Jews lived in what they call the countryside. So it's not only the Jews that have their connection with Thessaloniki, it's the Turks also, and many others, French, Italians, they have origins from Thessaloniki. This is very moving and very important for the future.
You know, it's a truly cosmopolitan city, there's no doubt about it. You are part of the Resilient Cities Initiative by Rockefeller Foundation, which I think it's a great honor to be involved with that. And it can be of a great benefit to the city, but also there are cases when cities get nothing out of it. And that happens when you get into a situation where you identify the problems, you identified what you need to do with them, and that's what, you know, the contribution of that whole initiative is. But then the municipality becomes unable to implement any of that. So in essence, it remains a study on paper, a study for which a lot of people have put a lot of effort and a lot of money has been spent, but it never gets utilized. And this is something that we have observed with similar efforts before, the inability of Greek municipalities to really benefit out of these efforts. So I wanted to ask you, how do you plan to do things differently so that you benefit of what you do as part of that Resilient Cities Initiative?
I think Lina should answer. She's our
Any of you, whoever is the one who feels more comfortable.
I was writing the proposal, but then Lina took over. And just as an introduction, maybe to say that actually the incentive, the motive to write and to bid for being part of the 100 Resilient Cities was the social upheaval and the economic crisis that we had. We had an experience in 2008 when we had riots in the city, and we were walking around and seeing damaging the shops, destroying properties and so on, and the city was unable to react in a preventive way somehow to what was happening. And that was the reason why we said we have to find a mechanism, to develop a mechanism to protect our city and to make our city resilient. And we bid, we are part of the story, and Lina can tell you more.
Well, first of all, thank you.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me now? Yeah,
yep.
That's better. Thessaloniki became part of the 100 Resilient Cities initiative at a very specific time and a very important point into what Thessaloniki should become. So having a deep understanding of what the city was, we had this opportunity to become part of this network. And we became part of this network through a very competitive process. So let's say there are more than 1,000 cities that have applied and 100 that have been selected. This is not another program. This is a strong commitment from both the city and the 100 Resilient Cities network. And we played and we work in two different levels. The first level is inside the municipality. So we have the resources and we created and staffed a resilience office within the city hall. So an office with young, active people that try to infuse this resilient aspect and this resilient methodology to the everyday activities of the city. The second part and the second scale we work with is we have continuous support through a network of global experts. So every day we are the office in Thessaloniki, but at the same time the office in London, the office in New York, even the office in Singapore. So this is a very robust support in what we do in every step of the way. The third and most important part is we have access to a pool of solution ideas about the cities and access to global organizations, the private sector, NGOs, universities globally. And this is not in our wildest dreams could we ever imagine that Thessaloniki, the second biggest city in Greece, could have access and be able to discuss issues that are relevant for the city with global organizations like, for example, the World Bank. What we like to say is that we are an email away from knowing what is happening to Paris or what is happening to Auckland or Melbourne. So, for example, now we have the heat wave in Thessaloniki. We know what Paris has done in order and how Paris develops their plan for the heat waves. So the first part is how you infuse this new kind of methodology, and you know better, most of the people here know that public institutions in Greece are not accustomed to strategizing, are not accustomed to planning for the future. So now we have the ability to use a state-of-the-art methodology that will give the Thessaloniki this competitiveness in relation to the other cities, not only in Greece, but in Europe and globally, in order to leverage resources and implement what our strategy is about.
Let me add one thing to that, is that we have a tool. It's the Metropolitan Company of Thessaloniki. Because Thessaloniki, the metropolitan area is 8 municipalities. Now, it's not worthwhile to talk about resilience and things like that with only one municipality of 350,000 people in an area of 1 million people. So what we want to use this tool, this metropolitan company, which is all the municipalities which are around Thessaloniki, have an important percentage on this company. But we still have some problems with it, but we'll manage. I just wanted to say about the...
Yeah, from the very beginning, we said also to the other mayors that we want to share this opportunity. So it's not an opportunity only for the municipality of Thessaloniki, but it's an opportunity for the city as a whole. Because exactly, resilience is an issue that we have to see in the urban fabric of the city, so not in the administrative boundaries of the city of Thessaloniki.
Let me comment a little bit on efficiency, because you asked also if we manage to be efficient. And I want to tell a few things about the city's finances. Because when we came into power, and this is very important, you need that solid base in order to do things. And when we came into power, we inherited a municipality with debts of over, I don't know, 45 million, 90 million euros. And we managed in 3 years to balance our budget, to pay the $45 million that we own to providers and collaborators and providers of the municipality. And in 4 years, we managed to have a surplus. Now we have a cash flow of 20 million euros. And this shows a kind of efficiency. This is not self-confident. This is not in Greece that is happening. We are exercising crisis management since 2010. We are also probably a product of the economic crisis. We came into power also because of the crisis. But we are exercising crisis management all these years. And I think and believe regarding finances in a positive way. So we are confident that we will manage now to do more.
One thing here is that a lot of times cities that become part of these efforts, they try to do big things. And the Resilient Cities effort, they provide the studies, but they do not provide the financing at the end. You will have to go out and find the money to implement what the study says that you need to do. And that becomes a problem sometimes, again, because if you aim too high, you end up not doing it. You also find out, and that's the interesting thing about these initiatives and talking to other cities, that sometimes small initiatives, small ones, can make a huge change. Do you have an opinion on that? Is that something that you're focusing on? How are you going to get the funding after the studies are done to implement things? And also, are you focusing on smaller things that can change the city radically without requiring huge funding?
Lina will tell more on the tools that we will activate in the next few years. I want to comment on what also the mayor said, that actually we as municipality, we don't imagine or we don't want to do big things. We are the facilitators. We are the mediators. We want to open the doors, to open the windows so that our people do. So the aim is to empower our own people, to empower the civic society, and that they do, to give opportunities. This is what we are doing, for example, with tourism. By developing tourism, by bringing over additional 1 million people from 2010 to Thessaloniki, by giving tangible benefit by this incoming tourism to our people, we force them in a way to activate, to be engaged as businessmen, as entrepreneurs in that sector. This is what we do. We don't want to be ourselves entrepreneurs and to do things. We want to give incentives, non-tangible incentives, actually, and to create the environment for our own people to do things. And the mayor, when he came in power, I remember 2010, the first thing he said is, don't expect from us huge pharaonic works. We don't have the money to do that.
The key word here is engagement. So from the very beginning of when you go out and say, okay, I'm going to do a strategy, you have to engage the stakeholders of the city, but also the citizens. What we've done so far, and within 2 months of work, we've engaged with more than 1,500 people. So 1,500 people have become part of this resilience dialogue. If you communicate and engage and create synergies from the very beginning, then when you've concluded your strategy, it means it's a strategy that is based on what the city already does, and it is part of the everyday activity of also of the stakeholders. So it's not a strategy and it's not a plan that you're going to make in a closed doors and in an office and then one day go out and say, okay, I've done the strategy, let's go out and implement. Of course, you'll never have impact on that. But you have to be very specific from the very beginning to engage with the people and also see all the different scales. So we are talking about a long-term vision. So we are talking about Thessaloniki 2030. We may talk about big visions as, for example, Axios River to Danube. But at the same time, we're talking about how we can institutionalize citizens' participation in the everyday life, how we change the behavior of the citizen in terms of waste management, in how they use the public space, issues of equity, at the same time issues of mobility, green infrastructure, and how this is connected to the shape of the local economy. So it's these horizontal issues of creating new kind of systems and also see what is out there. So what are the priorities of the EU? What are the priorities of the World Bank? What are the priorities of the European Investment Bank? So we have from the beginning to be very realistic because we had so far many studies and many strategies of, what a city would look like.
The refugee crisis. I mean, my engagement with the city is totally superficial, but it seemed to me, walking around that you are not burning the heavy impact of the crisis in the way other places do. Certainly not, the way that the entry points, the islands do. Certainly not the way Athens has had to carry that weight. But you have been asked to accommodate, to take in, to host a certain number of people, and the situation may change as well. As it's a very dynamic, evolving situation that changes day after day. How are you planning? Because you have talked in the past about not just taking these people in and providing them housing and and separating them, but completely integrating them within the civic life of the city, the urban fabric of the city. Can you talk a little bit about this? Which points, again, we had this conversation, points back to the city's ability to integrate and to have different ethnicities living next to each other, separately but at the same time together. You can't do that with such small numbers. It's obvious, that's delusional, but you can use that idea to create a different dynamic in the way we deal with refugees in Greece.
First of all, we must underline one fact, that the refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, wherever, they don't want to stay in Greece. In opposition with the refugees we had up to now, the Albanians, the Armenians. We had an Armenian community of 2,000 people, and now there are more than 12,000. The Greeks from Russia, from Georgia, They wanted to come to Greece. Now, these refugees, they don't want to come to Greece.
They don't want to stay.
They don't want to stay. So it's just passing through. So this is one problem, which is a problem because they don't cooperate.
But they might have to stay eventually.
Well, it's an obligation. We have to keep in Greece around 50,000 people. So we have to absorb them. And we have to convince them that it's good to stay in Greece. So we signed with the United Nations Refugee Fund, we signed an agreement for 100 apartments where we'll host refugees. We also are in discussions with the non-profit organization, the German non-profit organization, for building, erecting around 250 houses in an area we have, which is near Thessaloniki, but it belongs to the municipality of Thessaloniki. We have started operating a small six apartments in an old stables of Thessaloniki, which is transformed for refugees. They stay for 6 months and they change. So we have a problem with schools. Now the thing is that the authorities said that we must lead the guys, the young people, to the schools. Now I said, look, don't do that. They won't leave the boys, leave the places where they live, and by buses and go to schools and come back. They'll never do it. Try to apply what they called in Spain the moving schools. They did moving schools for the Romas, which works well. And instead of the students going to the school, let the teacher go to the place where they live. They feel more safe. So it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. Because first of all, they don't want to stay. But I think that little by little, then back from the schools, we have to offer them jobs. We have to offer them places of where they worship for the religion. In Greece, we don't even have a mosque, which is totally foolish. Huh? What can a mosque do but do? We are obliged to give any kind of help. We gave Yenijami last year, for the last 3 years. We gave Yenijami twice a year for the Ramazan and the Ramazan and the Bayram in August and in November, I think. They go there, they pray for 1 day, nobody is annoyed, nobody gets hurt. So where's the problem? Now, this is what we call, in Greece, we invented enemies. Everybody is against us. The Albanians are against us, the Skopjes are against us, the Turks are against us, God is against us, everybody's against us. So, but at the same time...
And then you're in trouble if God is against you.
At the same time, we are the most clever people in the world, and we have inherited the
we think so.
Yeah. So, who's going to change that? The system we have, the school system we have, I have 6 grandchildren. 3 of them, they are in the Elysium. So, and they are giving exams now. And they read from this page to this page, and from this page to this page. And I said, if we have a book with 100 pages and you read only 50, why print a book with 100 pages? I mean, the educational system in Greece, this is the source of everything bad that happens in Greece. The educational system. They didn't have lessons 1 day, They said, how come you don't have lessons? I said, the teachers are voting today. Can they vote on the weekend? So these are things, we can laugh about it, but these are tragic things. And unless we start doing something, this is going to be a no-no thing for the next.
No, I wanted to come back to the refugees because it's not easy, as you said, too, and I wanted to talk to you about it because you have very specific ideas about the whole thing. It is not easy to do this, you're right. There are a lot of different elements that have to be considered. At the same time, this is something that has been done well in other places. We have the know-how. There's certainly a lot of brain power and experience in this room. We heard it in the refugee panel yesterday. We have done a lot of work on this front, and there are a lot of really great NGOs working on the ground, both Greek and international NGOs. So there is a lot of knowledge, and there is a lot of willingness to help. And I wanted to ask you how you are approaching this whole thing, and whether or not you are working with all these people that know how to deal with situations like this.
Yeah. The mayor is, to begin with, I think the mayor is modest enough not to say that there's a huge difference between him and the rest of the politicians, maybe with the exception of Mayor of Kozani and a few others. It came from the discussion yesterday. We don't see refugees as a burden. We see them as an opportunity. Where the mayor was one of the very few ones to invite refugees even to be incorporated in the city center, even to open structures in the city center, open structures, of course. That's a big difference with the rest of the politicians. In addition to this, we're the first ones to ask for a contingency plan one year and a half ago. They were laughing at us at this time. Now they don't seem to be laughing that much. Also, we took responsibilities that they are not supposed to be ours. We run and we manage a camp in the port of the city. We did the first pilot, as the mayor mentioned, the first pilot structure for refugees, for asylum seekers in the city center. We had to encounter big resistance from hotheads and from fanatics, but they were convinced, and that's very important. We have to underline that we started educating people that these, because the media portray refugees like if they are devils, then we convince people that they are normal people, they have their kids and they want to look for a job and stay here with us. So apart from the humanitarian view that obviously we have it's very vivid in our movement, in Pρωτοβουλία and in the administration of the municipality, we have a different approach. We don't see them as a burden, we see them as an opportunity. Of course, we wouldn't be able to revive the cosmopolitan past of the city as it was, but we incorporate that to our vision for a cosmopolitan future. May I add something on a personal level? The mayor looks, he has his tattoos, he has his earring, and he seems to be very laid back to most of the people. I have to stress here as his advisor that he's extremely industrious, he's extremely hardworking. He works like more than 12 hours a day. It's difficult for us, despite being young, to follow his pace.
I know what you mean, believe me.
But in addition to that, I have to stress again that there's another difference between him and most of the politicians. He has an acute emotional intelligence, and he also has social skills that other people don't have. In the beginning, I thought, this guy doesn't have a concrete vision. He doesn't have a concrete plan. We don't meet every day between 3 to 5 in order to impose our plan, our detailed plan to the rest of the people. The more I work with him, I realize that he has a plan. And the plan is very concrete. It is to open up the city. It has 3 levels. We restored the monuments of the city of our past in order to achieve that. It has a second level, which is the networking and the synergies with the rest of the countries, or our neighboring countries, which is our inland. The modern Greek state amputated Thessaloniki. Not for, there were good reasons, obstacles, let's say, like the communist regime, the Cold War, but the mayor is the first mayor of Thessaloniki to believe in its magnitude, in its inland. Otherwise, you couldn't explain that he's the only mayor talking to presidents, talking to prime ministers. We met the president of Bulgaria, the president of Serbia, the president of Albania. We met with the president of Israel. He met former Prime Minister Davutoglu. He's not afraid to make Thessaloniki big again. In some ways, in an implicit way, he expresses his plan for the philosophers here in a postmodern tinge, but without the relativity of it. So he has a concrete plan. But we are not afraid of the human resources of Thessaloniki. We are not afraid of competition. We are not afraid of openness. We believe in our human resources. Also, we don't need to win and other people to lose. You know, we're looking for win-win situations. We believe in that. So I think that the mayor is very modest, and in some ways his vision is malleable. But this is because he believes in the bottom-up approaches. He really observes people. If someone would know him, he would believe that he doesn't have a view, an image of what is going on in the municipality. He always goes, he spends 2 hours with 2 people, he uses the vanity of people and he convinces that all of them are very important. He tells them that how nice views they have, but he knows what is going on in the municipality. He knows every detail of it. So he looks laid back, but he's industrious, he has a concrete vision, and as I explained, it's unfolding gradually, but very clearly to me. The more I work with him, the more sure I am about it.
Okay. I have one more question, and then I would like to open the forum to the audience for questions. We talked yesterday, Andreas in his introduction said that, you know, the opportunity is there for Thessaloniki to grab it. And this is a trend worldwide, that the emphasis now is on cities, on big urban centers, for a number of different reasons. The majority of the world's population is concentrated into cities, and cities, from an administrative perspective, are considered more nimble, more flexible. It may not be the case in Thessaloniki, but that's the general trend. So a lot of experiments are going on within cities that can define what happens at a much broader scale. And I wanted to ask whether or not you are aware of that opportunity that you have today, that you are engaged in a number of these different initiatives. Resilient City is one of them. You have opened the city to different fronts, that something that other Greek cities have not done. So you have an opportunity to really play an important role and to change things in a way that can be used at a much broader scale as a paradigm for the rest of the country. Are you aware of that? Is that something that is in the back of your minds? How are you looking into this? Because you do have, I think, a great opportunity here to set the stage.
Yes, I think we are aware of that. I mean, it's. I was amazed also listening to Leonidas, and sometimes you don't realize what you're doing and how you are working. And indeed, it has been a very creative time so far, and we hope it's going to be creative also in the future. We have opened up the city, that's true. We have achieved development in touristic terms. We are connected in many projects. We work with international institutions like yours and many others that I could now recall the name, but there's no meaning in that. So we have reached a stage where we have to unfold now more. And that more has to be more inclusive. This is the ambition for the next 2-3 years, I think. That we, as we mentioned many times, that we empower the civic society, we empower our own citizens, we make them part of this new story writing and this new writing of the DNA of the city, that they become part. This is the challenge for the next 3 years. And we are very much aware of that, and I'm sure that the mayor and ourselves, we want to reach that goal with a lot of determination and vigor, and bring the city, not only make it a metropolitan, transform it in a metropolis of the Balkans, of the region, but make it really an international cosmopolitan city.
If I may add something, is that when we took over the city, the idea is open up all windows, everything. Let the people get confused with what's happening. And then little by little, they'll start understanding what's happening. So we got to do things in different levels. The first and initial thing was to arrange the financial status of the municipality. As soon as we've done that, we have banks coming and offering loans, which is very important. We have already had approval from the European Bank, Investment Bank, for 50 million for doing small things, not big things. And we have now this coming. So the first thing was put in order the financial situation, and now it moves. The second thing was to improve three things. One was waste management, the second one was traffic, and the third was how the municipality works for the people. In waste management, we did some good things with recycling, and we've got a long way to go. With traffic, we failed. And with the better thing, the better way that the municipality serves the citizens, we still have many ways to go. You must understand how the public administration works. We have a negative position from the people working in the municipality, so that the citizens can use their cards, the credit cards, cash cards, whatever, to pay any kind of payment they have for the municipality. This is unreal. I said yesterday to somebody that I'm going to write a book, 5 years in the municipality of Thessaloniki, which is going to be science fiction. It's like that. So, as I told you, the thing is that we have three main big things that in the coming years they have to be in a top position. The big things, electric cars and energy and the Axios River, they are dreams. They can come true. We push them. But it's not only, we push them. Our job is to make this life of the city better. And we do it by small things. And then we give hope. We have to give hope to the people. We give hope that, yes, in the coming 15 years, we have barges going from Thessaloniki to Hamburg. This is a good hope. Yes, we have found the Ignatia Road with the workshops of gold and silver and things at the same place where they are now. And it is 1,500 years ago, the same place, the city came up and up. Now, the thing has been solved for 4 years. They have accused us of the metro thing being late because of the antiquities they found, which is totally not true. The company that took over the metro was bankrupt. There was no good study of the problems they would find on the way. Now, the goal is we have what we call the archaeological plaza, two plazas, one in the Alcazar and one in Bezesteni. With an underground bridge going over the finding of the Ignatia. And then the second round is Platia Δικητηρίου and the Roman Agora and the Panagia Chalkeon, which gives all the periods of Thessaloniki. The Ignatia, which is Roman Hellenistic, you have the Alcazar and Bezesteni being the Ottoman presence, you have Platia Δικητηρίου, you have even Neolithic findings down there, and you have the Roman market and the Byzantine church. So what more do you want? 2,000 years of history. It's the archaeological, and this is the use of history in a good way. Not just being very proud, oh, we are the straight from the ancient Greeks who invented democracy and I don't know what else.
So if I can summarize somehow, you see here there's a totally different, non-conventional perception of politics and what politicians should do. And this is the aim, this to become a virus, go down to society, to civic society, to our citizens, and they change also their approach and perception of public life, public sphere. Then Thessaloniki will not need Boutaris or any public figure. It will go by itself.
If I may...
quickly, so we can have a couple of questions.
Okay. It's related to the Living Lab, that Thessaloniki has all the great ingredients to become a testing bed for new ideas and new solutions. And we, as a city, to try to have a presence in all the big European events and even the global ones. But here, we have institutional challenges that we have to overcome, especially in how the national government and the regional government understand this new kind of position of the cities within the global environment.
Thank you. I would like to take questions from the audience. 2 or 3, please. Be as quick as possible, as precise as possible, and avoid statements, just ask directly. Yes, Professor Zakos.
I would like to thank you for your accomplishments and for your position concerning the antiquities. As an archaeologist, I have to praise that. And I have the feeling that the political establishment does not like what is happening in Thessaloniki. Am I correct or not?
Yes, I think you're correct. I think you're correct.
Any other questions? Back there. The gentleman in the back. Yes, yes. You, in the back. I know. Hold on a second, please. We are also going to have a chance to talk to them later. Go ahead, please. Yes, there's a mic there.
Thank you for you. My question goes to Mr. Mayor. What is your approach to make the city accessible for everybody, especially for disabled people? Thank you.
Accessibility for disabled people.
Yes. Can I say something? Right now, one member of our staff, Georgios Basmadelis, is in the United States following a program on accessibility in cities. And this is very important because it's none of us. It's not an elected member or something. It's a member of the staff of the city. And because this is one of the aims and strategic targets that we have, he's there getting know-how, bringing it back, and doing more here in Thessaloniki for accessibility.
Thank you. Go ahead, please. Anything on that? Alessandro?
Could you just, Alessandro Politi, could you just add a bit more detail on how you balanced the budget? Because big cities have always, these big debt problems. Thank you very much.
Yes, we had, apart from balancing the budget, we have to face some debts because of a huge scandal at the municipality of Thessaloniki, which we still do not know how high the missing money are. So one of the ways to balance the budget is cut down expenses. So you don't balance the budget by bringing up municipality taxes. On the contrary, we brought down municipality taxes and we cut down expenses, remaking the way we buy things for the municipality, from petrol to everything, and by paying promptly. One of the things we found out is that the municipality used to pay in a year and a half. Now this had as a result that the prices they got were 2 times more than the usual. you could buy things cheaper in a supermarket than, for example, cleaning goods in a supermarket. You buy them cheaper instead of buying 2 tons of cleaning things through competitions. So this is big money. This is big money. We pay in. Sometimes we have some problems, but because Greece, as you probably know, is a country in poverty, but in bankruptcy. But what we try to do is pay not more than 60 days. Our 60 days is cash, so people love it.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have concluded. Thank you very much.
We will shortly be moving on to the next session, so if you can please stay in the room in order to not miss anything. So now we will be moving on to plenary session number 4, dedicated to inequality, poverty, unemployment and education in the Balkans and the Mediterranean. Mr. Panos Papoulias, the moderator, is up on stage and we would like to call on for the remaining panelists. Thank you.
Συγγνώμη, είμαι έτσι γιατί προσπαθώ να τους δοκίσουμε. Εντάξει είστε? Οκ.
Oh, hello.
She told me that she visited several places this summer.
But in a very good way.
And then Canada. Bad that I wouldn't be able to see her. I hope we'll see her in other places.
Let's move a leg because we're running a bit late and we need to wrap this up as close to schedule as possible. So chances are that all of you thought at least some of the issues that will be discussed in this panel already at least once today. So whether you logged onto an online portal to read the news, well, whatever of the news is not on the possibility of Brexit, or you read them, through the old-fashioned way with the aid of an actual newspaper, the topics of unemployment, poverty, income deficiency, and education were likely to have featured very large in what you have read. These topics, in fact, have featured very large, at least a decade or so, particularly large for the last decade or so, during a time that Paul Krugman has referred to as the Great Recession. But in truth, these challenges have been around forever. The Great Depression, Germany's hyperinflation in the 20s, England's 18th and 19th century industrial mills are just some instances and some exemplification of these issues that we will discuss. Most probably, they're not the most notable ones, but many of these instances have existed in the past and will certainly exist in the future as well. An indication of how important these challenges are is the fact that they have many representations in the world of arts and literature. I mean, who amongst us that has read Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath can forget about that book? Munrau's Last Laugh, a film in the 1920s, portrays employment not just as a means to earn a living, but as a very important feature in shaping up one's identity. We have examples later on in the century in film. We have Vittorio De Sica's Bicycle Thieves in 1948, Kurosawa's Tokyo Sonata in 2008. These are films that talk about unemployment, and they all span almost a century. Music, the recently reformed Gang of Four, or the pop group, they sing about unemployment and the perils of not having a job. Pink Floyd's The Wall talks about education and how it influences youth's role and participation in society. Even academia has struggled with these issues forever. Karl Marx, Weber, Keynes, Krugman, Rogoff, they all try to deal with these things one way or another. No particular answer has been agreed on. So it's a little bit too much to hope that this panel will provide this answer. However, we can be certain that this panel will give us the opportunity to really reflect on some of the issues that the philanthropic sector faces on a daily basis, and on which it needs to delineate quickly and on which it needs to act swiftly. So this is a great opportunity to dwell in these issues a little bit more and possibly theorize on them, because theory is always for someone and for something and for a purpose. So starting with you, Melissa, what is the relationship between inequality and deficits in education, income and employment? Is there a defining factor?
So I think when you think about this complex of issues, which, as you correctly say, has been something that we have been struggling with across space and time for much of human existence, it's clear that all of these factors are not only causes but symptoms, and that they are completely interrelated. And I guess one way to frame this is not so much to think of this as intractable problems, which suggests that there is very little hope, but that they are more like what the German scholar in the 1960s, Horst Ritter, identified as wicked problems. He was contrasting them with what he called tame problems. And wicked problems, like poverty, inequality, unequal access to education, unequal access to employment, are problems that are difficult to solve, not so much because they're complicated, but because we don't have a broad consensus on exactly what the problem is. Different people will define the problem differently. For some people, what is a cause is for other people a symptom. As a result of that, there's no way to have a broad agreement on what the path forward is. And in fact, there's often no broad agreement on what it will look like when the problem is solved. What does it look like? What would it look like for us to say that we have solved the education problem? Exactly what would that mean? Is it simply literacy? Is it the ability to be a productive part of society? Is it the ability to secure a job that gives you a better living than you would have had otherwise? We don't have broad agreement on the problem, and therefore we don't have such broad agreement on the solutions. So those are wicked problems, and that in many ways is the work of philanthropy.
So, Alan, given that there are all these definitional issues that truly affect our, the way one can act on addressing these problems, how shall we go about addressing them?
Well, I have the answer.
Great.
I'm going to sell my car and move to Thessaloniki. But as you said, these problems have been around for a long time, and Plutarch 2,000 years ago had a go at this very topic in his book on education. And he concluded that the beginning, the middle, and the end of the matter is education, that poverty, inequality, employment, unemployment is a function of whether you have access to education or not. And I think to further sharpen the problem, I think for me it's the problem of access. How do we assure that women and girls have equal access to education? How do we assure that the 75 million young people whose 75 million whose education has been interrupted by these current conflicts all over the world, how do we assure that refugees of the future will have access to education? To me, is the problem, and we can't solve poverty, inequality, or employment without being sure education is there. The problem is public policy is not addressing these problems. There's not a public policy of education for women and girls. There's not a public policy for education to take care of the refugees and the displaced people. And that's where foundations are really stepping up. And I'm noticing it more and more that it's the foundations rather than the governments. It's the private sector rather than the public policy that is taking care of addressing these gaps. And we're lucky to have it.
So I think you mentioned two very important things. One is that you have made an argument on education being the cause of the problem and all the others, unemployment, etc., being the effects. And you also mentioned the role of the state, which somehow is not being fulfilled right now. Which, let's keep the first one in mind for the rest of the discussion. And the second point you made, I would like to address it to Stefanos. Stefane, what is the role of the welfare state in this? I mean, clearly we have an entity that must get control of the situation and provide what it has to provide, and doesn't do that.
Of course, we have a welfare mix. Please, could we show the plot, please?
Have prepared a few graphs?
Yes, excellent, excellent. We have a welfare mix: state, market, the third sector, voluntary sector. At Democritus University, we have a research agenda. It emphasizes on poverty and the welfare state effect on poverty rates, on poverty outcomes. So I won't go into much detail. I would like very much to show you, to make a very short description of some important empirical findings, because, you know, empirical-driven policy making is so important. It's so important in terms of social policy. So let's have a look, please. We have on the vertical the poverty rate, and this analysis is based on welfare clusters, welfare regimes. I embrace the typology of Espen Andersen and other theories like Petmezidou, Papatheodorou, Katrougalos, etc., that have worked on the South European welfare model. Okay, so we have four welfare state types: the social democratic, the conservative, which is refers to the continental countries, the liberal, the Anglo-Saxon countries, and the South European. So you see the pattern. these are poverty rates based on the period 1995-2013, where we have data, empirical data from ECHP and EUC, and we ran this longitudinal and comparative analysis. So look at the pattern, please, and we can move to the next one, please. Look at the pattern. No, please, the previous one, please.
This one?
No, this one, yes. Nordic, continental, Anglo-Saxon, South European, the escalation of poverty rates. First pattern. Let's proceed, please. So now and thanks a lot for this.
So we have one more, so let's keep it
short. Yes, I will keep it really short. So we have an indication that the welfare state plays a significant role in poverty rates, in the variability of cross-national variability in poverty rates. So what have we done here? We have taken the structure of the social transfers, pensions and other social transfers. We have three symbols: the circle, the dash, and the diamond. The circle is poverty rate at the beginning, the initial poverty rate. You see, they are quite similar among the welfare clusters. The dash is after pensions. Take a look at Greece, please. The EL, Elas. See, the pension effect is huge. But see the rest of the social transfers. We have no other social transfers: housing, family, healthcare, disability, housing, I don't know what else. It's really residual in our country. But there is a pattern here as well. There is a pattern that says that other social transfers, except pensions, account for a large part of the reduction in poverty rates. Okay, the third one.
That's the last one.
This is clear-cut, I think. This is clear-cut. We have a pattern in terms of clustering of countries. Please have a look. Have a look. Up, we have the South European countries. In between, the liberal and the continental. And down, right, the Nordic. And alongside, Netherlands. In our analysis, the Netherlands is in the social democratic welfare regime. And what is important in this? What is important? The R-squared, this number, 0.78, is a huge number in terms of the explanation of the variability of poverty. So my forceful argument is over the necessity of implementing universal social citizenship-based provisions.
So, given that this is the argument, can we safely assume that Alan's point that governments don't actually promote effectively education right now is
I told you that I will be rather critical. I very much appreciate the work of all of you, very much. I would like to be rather critical towards the concept of human capital that has dominated, okay? And we see the large share of the anti-poverty funds, the lion's share.
But just give me a second. Before we go into human capital, would you agree?
Because you said about education. For me, education is not the solution for everything. Social protection is always a solution. Eh?
So the point is, we identified here education as a prime motive for the creation of unemployment, income deficiencies, etc., and we have an argument here that, you know, in your view, the data shows that this might not be necessarily the case. You think there are other causal factors that are at play other than education, correct?
Almost 80%.
Almost 80%.
This says a lot.
So what I get from both points then is that whether it's education that is the prime defining factor of this, or there are other factors as well, that the welfare state should play a big role, but right now we are all experiencing that this role is not adequately fulfilled, for whatever reason. So my next question to Claire is, Claire, given that this is the case, for whatever reason, are there any hybrid systems that could accommodate and fill in the gaps of these potential failures of the welfare state?
Well, I think one of the problems we all have, I mean, in Europe and also in the areas I look at in North Africa and the Middle East, the Levant. So if we're looking primarily at the 20 states which border the Mediterranean, one of the problems is the welfare state is struggling because there isn't enough income coming in. You know, taxation is the source of income to put into welfare services. If you're not generating more businesses, you're not getting more competitive, there are not more active citizens, it's a diminishing returns game to see higher unemployment, and as we know, Youth unemployment in Greece, in Spain, to some extent Italy, and to a lesser extent France, is as high, if not higher, than it is in North Africa, which is shocking, really, given the standards of living are actually lower in North Africa. This youth unemployment is predominantly made up of graduates. Certainly that's the case in North Africa, but there are a lot of unemployed graduates of universities. So education is needed, but you also need a system which is more joined up. Now, you're asking about hybrid systems. I think one of the areas we've neglected in policy is what's generally called the third sector. So things like social enterprise, cooperatives, they have been on the rise in recent years. But to me, I know, Melissa, you said we have to agree on the problem. To me, across the region, we're looking at the Mediterranean basin, the key problem is the contraction and crisis of the middle classes. Because unless you have that link between the very poor, and we can move on and talk about inequality, but the wealthy and those who are not only gaining more wealth, but are actually closing the doors behind them in terms of wealth generation, you've got to have a dynamic middle class, and that's how you employ the unemployed graduates, through things like social enterprise, through things like SME development. I'm struck by the number of training programs I've been involved in, particularly in North Africa, where the trainers and the funders go so far to train people, educate them in new skills, whether it's the Young Arab Voices program I was involved in, or the young, we've actually got a member here from the Young Arab Analysts Network International, getting people to think on the ground, younger people, so in the 25 to 35 age group, how they can influence policy so that money is put in intelligent places to support good ideas. What we don't do, whether it's within countries or funders from outside, is open the doors where we can with senior policymakers, with the elites, I'll call them the gatekeepers, who are not, for all sorts of reasons we can go into, in the least bit interested in allowing new actors in to what is a limited cake, which may in future years be shrinking. And all I would say is I think a role for philanthropy in this lies in its convening power, in the fact that it can network across the very smallest actor to the most senior and actually find out who is ready to understand what I call I'll finish on this, their Lampedusa moment. Now, this is the Count Lampedusa, not the island. If anyone has read, it's my favorite book in Italian, Il Gattopardo, The Leopard, where the Count of Lampedusa famously said, as he saw this is in the 19th century, he saw Garibaldi's forces moving on Sicily, where he was an impoverished count, and basically said, everything has to change in order for things to remain the same. Those of us who have access to senior policymakers, politicians, those involved in the key economic, in the sort of big businesses and international networks, we have to persuade those people that they have to open the gate a bit for more growth, to allow more people in, particularly this younger generation who are at the moment across the region. I mean, I see it very much in North Africa, but it's happening here too. People are not being allowed in, and this is a generation that has very good ideas. SMEs, we've talked about non-stop for the last 5 years. They're failing because the regulatory framework isn't there, the credit isn't accessible, there's corruption all over the place. They are being blocked. We need those doors to open. We need to persuade people the cake gets bigger, that other people have a slice of the cake in order for them to protect their own cake, because, or their piece of the cake, because history tells us if they just close down the hatches, eventually what we saw in 2011 across the region will happen again. It's inevitable.
So, Claire, you talk about the importance of the welfare state. You identify some failures that are in existence, irrespectively of the reasons behind them many times. And you elaborated on the complexity of the situation, the different actors and how they might collaborate with each other. My question to you, Karima, stems from an address you did to the African Trade Forum a few years ago. You said in the African Trade Forum that the role of a government in a planned economy is much easier than the role of the government in a market economy. In the planned economy, it might not work, but they know what to do. In a market economy, things are more complicated. I wonder, how you see the possibility of the government having a successful role and partnership with all the other sectors, given the complicated picture that Claire communicated to us.
Yes, in a controlled economy, the government has more control and they can put policy, whatever they want. Not necessarily this is the best policy, you know, but that's it. Although with uncontrolled economy, with the market economy and so, the government doesn't have this. But let me tell you, and this may be new information to you too, what has made me say that. It was an African conference, as you said, and it was international, and it was put because of trying to prove that, or trying to find a way to overcome poverty in Africa. You know, in Africa, it's the highest poverty all over the world. And they took the UN took the strategy of trying to beat poverty with trade. And they invited people, you know, businessmen, so from all over the European and American countries and the African countries. And I was invited as a consultant to open and lead discussion and to explain the relation between poverty and international trade. And as I have discovered, well, whatever you do, I mean, reading and trying to write, they are things in actual life which you cannot tell, you know, until you are faced with it. This was the fact that, you know, in the first session, I was opening the relation between the two, and we have to improve trade in Africa and so on. And in the lunchtime, I found some businessmen and women coming to my table and saying, we want to tell you something which they could not say in the hall. This was the following, that, you know, in Africa, there are two countries, there are supposedly countries beside each other. Because of the controlled economy and the government rules they put, they are not allowed to trade between them. And so if they want commodity A from the country is a neighbor country, they cannot get it.
So my question on this is, if governments have proven to be so difficult to work on that level, will they be proven to be more successful in working in more complicated environments together with the third sector or the private sector in order to promote welfare state objectives?
I am telling you, and then I'll come to the conclusion, something which I have learned as an economist. You know, this country, they have to export the commodity to one of the European countries or Middle East countries, and the other countries, which they are poor, they have to import it from them, the same commodity to them, which means a lot of money has the consumer to pay for the commodity which he can get much cheaper, you know. And so why is that? Because the government is under control, and there are conflicts between, and this happens in many African countries, you know. And I wonder whether in other developing countries or not. But here I'm saying is that when you say the government, yes, they can control it, and they have to overcome these burdens, but they don't do it because of politics, you know. And that's why I'm saying, yes, the government has said you have to part of it, because the end of the session, at the last sessions, I have attacked the governments in the African government, and I have attacked the international organizations because they have to put pressure on those governments just to release the policies, is to make people less poor by allowing it.
So would you be optimistic or pessimistic on the prospect of governments working within a state with other sectors of the non-profit or for-profit sector in trying to promote things like education, better income distribution, etc.? Do you think this has a good potential, or do you think it's something that we will not see happening?
Well, they look at it from their own view, which is not necessarily, but most of the time I see it, it's not the optimal view.
Okay.
And if you find that when I say the international organization, because they can put pressure in certain ways by, you know, just the subsidy they give, the help they give, in order to make them look at it, because there are policies which the international organization put pressure on it, which is wrong for the country, because country A has its special conditions, country B has its special conditions, etc.
So, Alan, we have a view here that, you know, the welfare state, very important, many different aspects to the goods it can promote with differences of opinion on the causality of those aspects. A very complicated environment, as Claire identified it, and a rather pessimistic view on the ability of a government to deliver on these hybrid system partnerships. What is your view on the ability of the other members of that hybrid system partnership to deliver, namely the third sector? Is the third sector equipped to complement the state rather than substitute it in some cases? And will the third sector support welfare state initiatives without crowding out other different causes like volunteerism or private or state investment?
Well, when you look at the charts, you wish there were more welfare states, given the reduction of poverty that seems to happen. And I think the private sector and philanthropy is really stepping up in a major way, unprecedented way. It didn't happen really much in the 20th century, to replace or to do things we all wish the state would do to address unemployment, poverty, inequality. I see it often through education, because the big bets philanthropy is making are giving women and girls access, working on access for people with disabilities, creating educational systems in parallel where the state has failed. Foundations are educating out-of-school children because the state's 59 million out-of-school children, because states are unable to deal with out-of-school children. So I think the reality of this century is that the welfare state is probably here, and it's being financed by philanthropy.
Stefane, I see you smile over there. Your thoughts?
Alan is an expert on education. Okay. I told you I have a critical approach over education, and by considering education the human capital of individuals, okay, as the most important determinant of our welfare, we tend to ignore other parameters. Other parameters, and do you mind if we show the equation now?
Yes, we have an equation that solves the problem of the welfare state. It always helps to talk with equations.
I know it may look complicated, but
it's the next one.
Okay.
Now that's an equation I understand.
That's the equation.
You know, that's why I wanted you to assist.
Walk us through it.
This is the human capital theory equation. Okay, it's simply put, our welfare depends on the parental investment in our education, okay, and other parameters that determine this relationship are the individual traits, eta, plus the random component in life, luck. Okay, but the most crucial...
How big is luck? How big is luck? How much percentage?
Well, the other parameters explain approximately half of the involved mechanisms. Okay? Almost half. So we don't know the other half. It's called the black box, actually. We don't know the other half. The welfare state plays a crucial role. But since you cannot link macro-level variables with micro-level variables, it's not easy to estimate the welfare state effect directly.
Okay, so my question is this then. I mean, here we have a way to quantify things, and I'm sure many people will disagree on the basic methodology of that, but it is a methodology. I mean, it's specific. And apart from education, there are other aspects to inequality in a society that the third sector tries to address. A very easy one is, well, not an easy one, a very blatant one is healthcare, right? So you might get health-related conclusions out of this equation, but the fact remains that when you go to a hospital during an economic crisis, you see deficiencies. And these deficiencies, for one reason or another, cannot be filled up by the welfare state. What does the third sector do there? Do they intervene or do they not? Do they not because they are seen as substituting the state, or do they complement?
Proactively or reactively? This is the main essence of social policy today. Should the welfare state act reactively or proactively or reactively? Now the emphasis is on the proactive fashion. Okay, we invest in the human capital of children, of individuals, so that they can become employable, they can insert themselves in the flexible labor market, and so on and so forth. Okay? But what I want to say about this equation here, it brings welfare state retrenchment.
It brings?
Welfare state retrenchment.
Retrenchment?
Retrenchment. Because the emphasis is placed on human capital, Becker and Toms, what did they say? We should invest in human capital by direct public investments in education. And let's constrain all the other fields of social policy, because what matters is human capital, education. Newer assessments, Alan, show that the education per se cannot explain much of the variability of poverty, inequality, take whatever indicator you want. And the second parameter is that it doesn't explain much of your achievements in your working career anymore.
But here I have the following question, and Melissa, I'll get to you with a follow-up after the question for Claire, because I think it will set up the discussion about social investment very well. Claire, there was a paper by Chatham House not a while ago, very recently, where you researched the expectations of youth around the Mediterranean basin, and you found very similar expectations from all the youth. How would that finding fit with, Stefanos' elaboration on the role of the welfare state and
well, it depends. Don't forget, I come from the Anglo-Saxon models, which I was horrified to see seem to be failing completely on poverty alleviation, because we're actually told that absolute poverty has gone down in the UK. But on this specific question, what's really striking is, don't forget, we come from, well, I work in a policy environment where we're looking at the geopolitics, and in discussions about this area, particularly North Africa, we're absolutely fixated by the spread of radicalization, by ISIS, by the fear, which comes very much from the north to the south, that young unemployed people means people vulnerable to being picked up by terrorist organizations and criminal networks as well. And in doing this, it was interviewing people from Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt and Jordan, who are all involved in this program I mentioned, Young Arab Voices, which they've signed up to. Amazingly, it's a debate club to learn the critical thinking skills, which apparently they don't get in school, of debating. So they have to argue from points of view that they don't necessarily hold themselves. So we had a debate on, has the Arab Spring been a success, or has it been a failure? And regardless of their own opinions, they had to put together the arguments that defended either side. This, to my surprise, because I thought it's debate clubs of the sort of things we do at Oxford University and universities in the UK, has proved to be a huge success. It's like a light bulb going off. They are applying these skills to thinking outside their own environments and joining up the dots for themselves in the environment they're working in. And when we interviewed them and said, what really matters to you, they were extraordinarily dismissive of the discourse about radicalization. They said, the vast majority of people are not interested, have no intention of radicalizing themselves or being radicalized. What we want is a job, a life, a career, to travel, to move around the region, to be allowed out, to have visas to Europe so that we can study or work, then come back and apply the skills that we've learned to our own economies, pick up new ideas, which they're already doing online, by the way. We seriously underestimate a generation which is logged in laterally as well as vertically all over the place. They can find things out, particularly those who suddenly realize what critical thinking means in terms of evaluating the truth or merits of various things they're finding. And everything they said about massive unemployment, about being excluded, about not being listened to, about there not being space for young people to express themselves, about there being no appreciation that if you do want to find out about who's being radicalized, the ones who are not being radicalized know what's happening in their peer group. No one asked them. Youth policies are made without any consultation at all of the youth who are concerned. And it seems to me this is also happening increasingly in Europe. If you look at the protest movements, the new parties, we're just ahead of the next stage of elections, or rather re-elections in Spain, because there are new parties, Podemos, Ciudadanos, who have risen out of the events in the Arab world in 2011 to say our political classes no longer represent us, they're corrupt. We want something else, we want something more participatory. So just to link it briefly with the model, you said 50% is luck. We live in the Mediterranean. 50%, or at least some of that 50%, is who you know. It's what the Arabs called wasta. You know, luck does not play a role in a system or systems which are losing sight of meritocracy. There was a period, can I just finish a sentence? There was a period in which if you did well, or certainly where I come from, you did well at school, you got good results, you would have the same chance, pretty much, as anyone else to get a job. Now, systems are such, including in the UK, whereas if you don't come from a privileged moneyed family, even at Chatham House we have internships. They are privileged. Despite all the efforts we make to bring people in from further afield, if you don't live near London, you haven't got somewhere to live for free. We pay for the transport to get to Chatham House and food, and people, it's limited to 3 months, so we're not prejudicing people who would otherwise be employed, and we tend to take on students whose internship at Chatham House enables them to get better jobs later. But we have systems throughout Europe, and particularly I would say in the Mediterranean, where it's the wasta system. It's who you know, whether you have parents, family, connections who can help you get a job, help you get that funding line to start up your business. This is something we're not addressing. It's not luck. We have to cut back and find ways of opening these doors I mentioned earlier to allow more people in on merit, because they have a good idea, because they followed a good education, because they are willing to contribute to society. And the more money you generate, the more you're going to be able to have these hybrid systems in which the expectations we all have of the welfare state, looking after us, as we say in Britain, from the cradle to the grave. The health service is entirely free, but it's cracking. You have to have bits of the system which will pick up the slack through social enterprise, which is a way of, for example, setting up homes for the elderly on a for-profit basis, but actually provides a social good, and there's a number of those happening throughout the Mediterranean.
So thank you for this insight and for the candid answer. So, Melissa,
yes.
Is then the discussion on the role of philanthropic institutions and the third sector one according to which the third sector is there to promote equal opportunity and options that people don't have?
Yeah, I think in the current environment there are two sort of massive opportunities for philanthropy, and they're very disparate. One opportunity has to do with the 50% that's in the black box, some of which, as Claire has indicated, has to do with basic issues having to do with rights, opportunity, and access. If philanthropy does not continue to shed a light on that, we are really only playing with half a deck of cards rather than the whole deck. So that's one end of it. The other is that the reality also is, as many people have already noted, the welfare state has done tremendous things in terms of transfer of funds from one part of the economy to another, but it's not going to be sufficient, and in many places in the world it's already insufficient, without a better relationship with private sector actors and new ways to think about using financial models and tools. We will not even be able to work with the 50% that lives outside the black box very successfully. And that's the field that you were mentioning earlier of social finance, which is, in one way of looking at it, part of philanthropy. If philanthropy is the voluntary use of private resources for public good, that doesn't necessarily restrict itself to donations. That can also mean the role of philanthropy in enabling social investment or income or impact investing, which is opportunities to use capital to get some kind of a financial return while also getting a carefully documented social and environmental return. And those investments may be above market, at market, below market, but they are a way of harnessing a level of capital that is far beyond the amount of money that philanthropy can simply donate. And those opportunities are going to be very important for us to have a sort of way of working with the private sector, the public sector, and the third sector going forward. We need to use those tools, we need to understand them better, and we need to unleash that kind of capital potential.
So would you say that in the context of the positive externality of future economic development, of all the things that you described, the role of the third sector is, or not the whole of the third sector, the role of foundations in the third sector is to help governments and the private sector take on more risk than they would be willing or that they could take, or is it something deeper than that?
So philanthropy, especially an endowed foundation, is in a unique position to take a kind of risk that is difficult for the public sector to take, although the mayor of Thessaloniki seems quite prepared to take quite a lot of risk, and that the private sector is often reluctant to take when they don't see how a return can be generated. So social enterprise is one route to that, but there's also a whole wealth of innovations developing in the field of, for example, financial inclusion. And that includes not just access to microcredit, which doesn't create very much in the way of assets, but micro savings, micro insurance, opportunities for online learning, for things like fintech. All of these kinds of things are currently being experimented with on a trial basis with support from the philanthropic sector as well as the corporate sector. And if these models are successful, and one of the initiatives that we've been involved in was an online course to train people from 20 developing countries in fintech, had an 87% graduation rate. That was just last month. We'll see what that turns to in terms of employment, and from that, what does it turn into access to financial instruments for people at the bottom of the pyramid. Philanthropy can kind of road test and develop proof of concept for some of these kinds of ideas that can then be taken to scale either by the state or by the private sector.
Are the new philanthropists interested in these topics as opposed to curing disease?
Many new philanthropists are. I think that everybody who comes into philanthropy new tends to want to start off with something that's tactical. And so there's a sense of comfort in building schools, in funding medical research, because we all understand what that is. But the more time people spend and the more they realize that these are not tame problems but wicked problems, the more they realize that they have to look at new tools and new ideas.
Karima, do you think these innovative solutions that they try to provide a proof of concept that may or may not work at a greater scale are applicable in the Mediterranean? I mean, they seem to be working in certain parts of the world very well up to now. Can we apply them here?
Yeah, I didn't concentrate well because I don't feel well about what she's suggesting of.
Well, the suggestion was that there are initiatives of microcredit or providing financial hybrid solutions to people who are disadvantaged in society through philanthropic foundations. And these are used in the United States context, at least, rather successfully so far. Is this something that can be applied in the Mediterranean context, or is it science fiction for us?
No, it depends on your starting point. Because if you have, illiteracy is high, and you have even with education, you don't get really talent, Therefore, microfinances cannot be as successful as it is supposed to be. They got microfinances, and then they close the project, and some of them are even, they are thrown in the prison, and I know that on facts, because also I worked consultant for some of those philanthropies even give microfinance. I said it doesn't work. Therefore, it depends what are the conditions of the country, and that's why I think it's very wrong that, as we say to the international organization, to have the same solution for everyone. No, this applies to the developed countries, maybe because there are the different setup are different, but not for us. It's the same with poverty and income distribution, etc. There are things which you have to look at the country itself and then try to see the best policy for it, you know.
Claire, do you have a similar experience from such initiatives in the places that you have studied, or have a different view?
Well, I was just going to agree with Karima that, you know, the two strap lines, if you like, I hold in my head since the uprisings in protest movements of 2011 is, number one, the devil is in the detail. And that's basically, we cannot apply the same things, you know, that every country, one of the things that's happened since, I'll call it the Arab Spring for the sake of brevity, but everything that's happened in the region demonstrates how what looked like very similar autocratic systems have now changed into very different things. So some have reverted back to worse than before 2011, others have progressed, and you actually have to look very closely at what is going on in each country and seek out, I think too often, and I see this a lot in European policy towards North Africa, the whole Euro-Mediterranean structures, devise grand framework plans, but they fall flat when it comes to the implementation. And I think it's one of the roles I would see for philanthropy is not just piloting, and I totally agree, good ideas, but actually joining up the dots, making sure that the people who are stopping things happening make them happen, incentivize them, cajole them, persuade them, convene meetings where everybody gets to know each other so that from top to bottom, nobody's feeling threatened. I think one of the reasons there is this blockage of the younger generation is obviously an older generation who are not as linked in as the younger people are afraid of, they have vested interests, they're afraid of what follows next. They've already had a sense of the instability of the region, so they're all clamping down. For others, it's political reasons, you know, it's all about linking the economy to politics, etc. So the other strapline I've had in mind is follow the money, because it's a myth to say there is no money around the Mediterranean. And we have to focus more on unleashing those pots of money. For example, in Tunisia, Tunisians with money are not investing in Tunisia. The Tunisian government is increasingly appealing to the outside world to fund infrastructure projects they need to link the coast to the interior of Tunisia. But what does it take to mobilize the money within Tunisia? Because it's the biggest incentive to others, that if you're investing in your own society, others will follow. But until you do, so it's breaking those chains, because there's big money in the region, but look where it's going. It's going, certainly in the case of Egypt, and there's a lot of Gulf money being put into Egypt to secure the Egyptian system as it is. How much of that money, I mean, there was $20 billion was put into the banking system. How much of that money is going into creating youth employment? How much of it's going into big infrastructure projects, which may be needed, but it's still not trickling down in the old vocabulary, to creating jobs for a very, very squeezed middle class? The majority of the middle class in Egypt still want to and work for the state. So breaking out of those models is not something one individual philanthropy can do, but actually challenging the received wisdoms and finding allies, those I call of the Lampedusa moment, those who've understood there is going to be a round two of the Arab Spring, or whatever you want to call it, and there'll certainly be protests here and elsewhere unless the system gives. It allows more people in, it allows good ideas to flourish, and the detail side of this is you have to look at the regulatory framework, the enablers, why it's being blocked. I know, just to finish, a very ambitious young entrepreneur in Morocco, and Morocco is supposed to be one of the better environments to do this, who says SMEs fail because they can't get access to credit. The credit goes to people who know people who know people. The system is corrupt. You have to spend your whole time getting rubber stamps to actually continue operating, and there's a big, we haven't talked about, informal sector. Around 40% of the Moroccan economy is completely outside the welfare state. I mean, it's, you know, the parallel economy. And the third thing is, even though you're doing a good business, you have a good business plan, your clients don't pay. So you need small claims courts. And if you go bankrupt after all this, it's a criminal offense. So we should decriminalize bankruptcy, create an environment in which to fail at least once is part of your long-term plan, because that's how it works elsewhere. And those who can, I keep saying we, I'm very critical of these discussions that say, we need to do these, we need to do that. One of the roles of philanthropy in convening is to identify who is going to do it, who wants to do it, who can be persuaded to do it, who has the ability to open doors, who has the ability to put the pilot schemes that look good. These financial models have to be inserted in context with people who are incentivized to do it and which are sustainable. And you only do that by changing mindsets, attitudes, and at the moment the attitudes are very much security-based, very much retrenched. This is a much bigger problem than I'm describing, but particularly in Egypt, the shutters have gone down.
So Stefane, I mean, here we have an implicit answer to your question on whether philanthropy should step in proactively or reactively. Here we have a very clear proposal that philanthropy should step in proactively in instigating structural change. Very small on the one hand, but very impactful possibly on the other. What's your take on that?
First of all, let me say something that Claire mentioned earlier. It's about the South European societies. I know South European societies have these family key networks that rely extensively on, and the concept of clientelism, which is very crucial in our case. But coming to your question now, voluntary sector is not my area of study and research and so on. I know a few things about the third sector and philanthropies, but the important element is that, in my view, let's take the Reagan administration. We made a discussion earlier about the Reagan administration and how the voluntary sector was used in order to curtail social spending. We have to bear this in mind, that the third sector serves a lot to the society, but it can be the vehicle through which welfare state retrenchment can take place. So maybe I'm not expressing it in the correct manner. I'm trying to elucidate my point as the best I can. So I'm in favor of the welfare state. I think it's not a secret anymore. Right? I'm in favor of the welfare state, and I'm in favor of empirical data. Why? Why? Because they allow us to depict in the best way our social reality. Okay, our social reality is best depicted by our empirical data. What we have at hand, we can analyze it and draw some conclusions. I'm sorry, I didn't answer quite well your question.
You answered perfectly, and it it gives me a very good lead to ask Melissa. I mean, I can't remember whether it was George Orwell or Hayek that said that the road to serfdom is paved with good intentions. I mean, what Stefano says is that foundations try to do well, but by doing well, they nest a grave danger for society.
Sure.
Well, what's your take on that?
I think that's absolutely accurate. I don't want to be too political, but I think that many governments have used as an excuse for retrenchment the concept that the third sector is going to be able to step into their role. And I think that they are often being very disingenuous because they know very well that the size of the third sector is orders of magnitude smaller than the resources of the public sector. So by itself, philanthropy in the charitable sector cannot be a substitute on a one-for-one basis for what it is that the state can do. The philanthropic sector is much, much smaller than, and will always be much, much smaller than the private sector or the public sector. In the U.S., for example, the Gates Foundation plays a very significant role in funding education policy, et cetera. The entire annual budget of the Gates Foundation for its education philanthropy is the equivalent of 1 week of the budget of the New York City public school system. So philanthropy is not going to be able by itself to substitute for the welfare state. And I don't think philanthropic leaders see themselves coming in and doing that because they recognize the arithmetic is not going to work. On the other hand, when we look at the recently enacted SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that all of the member countries of the UN agreed upon last September, I believe that the annual cost to achieve these goals by 2030 is in the neighborhood of 45 trillion a year. I'm not exactly sure what that means. But that kind of funding is not currently available in the philanthropic sector or in the public sector. So we have to figure out new ways to harness money to make change happen. That's all I would say. And it is absolutely true that it has to be appropriate culturally and developmentally for every country and place. But we need new ways to make money make change happen.
So last question for the panel before we open it up for a discussion, and it's a question for both Karima and Alan. I'll pose it to both of you in turns. So let's say you sit in the board of a foundation and you have a finite amount of money, and you have to choose to fund either one of the two. Fund direct employment opportunities for people that are young and unemployed, or fund development of skills for these people without directly funding their employment opportunities. Which one of the two would you go? It's either black or white. It's easier than in real life.
I think it is the same, you know, because if you have many illiterates and when I say illiterates, this does not mean that they don't read and write only, no. But there are also culturally illiterates. I mean, they go to the university as in Egypt, you know. They study things which they cannot have them in employment, you know. Therefore, I think the same goes together, you know. That is, you train them, or just when you say employment, how would you create employment? Unless you give them funds. And I'm telling you, there are quite a few, they cannot pay the debt if they don't have the skills, and you don't give them the technical support. That's a problem. Because, okay, they can give, I can give small funds, but the most important thing, I'll give them technical support. It's not what they do in Egypt, for example, they help them in marketing their product. This is not the number one. Number one, the skill itself, because when they come to a new project, they don't have much skill. And they say, okay, you have made already, you provide the, you know, this, I forgot the name, the primary study that you can do it by that and that. This is not enough, because you go to any office and they do it for you, but you yourself, when you open your project, cannot do anything. Therefore, when you see what to be done, you know, it's not only its skills, try to upgrade their skills, it's this get employment, but even when you give them employment and give them funds, you have to be after them until you'll be sure they stand there on their own. But the way it is done, it's not good. And when you say employment also, because we have, and that's important to mention, the productivity of the labor. The productivity of the labor is really low. And for example, in the public sector in Egypt, you have to employ people, you know, although their productivity is very low. And this is quite a cost for you, and you make losses, you know. Therefore, even if you give them low wages, this does not work, you know. I have made some calculations regarding to the study on Germany and Egypt. Germany, they pay much higher wages than Egypt. But what we care for is the productivity. I mean, do the labor, you know, take a certain wage, you know, just make profits, I mean, make productivity which brings profits and so. And the study ended up that labor in Egypt is more expensive than in Germany, given the productivity of it, you know. Therefore, I mean, we shouldn't be really, believe to numbers, you know. We have to do whatever is really right.
So, Alan, because I think you would rather kind of agree with this answer, I'll make it a little bit more complicated. Let's say you focus this dilemma in the context of a 55% youth unemployment. So clearly you have economic conditions that are overwhelmingly bad. So do you invest on people's skill developments and education, or do you try to make some sort of arrangement with government or the private sector and create employment opportunities? I mean, how much can you beat a dead horse when it's dead?
For me, it's very clear I would invest in employment, because I don't think 19th century education institutions know how to train people for jobs in the 21st century. And in our own country, if you gave me that choice, I would expand our army. Not because I want to send the army anywhere, but it's the only thing that trains illegal immigrants, gives them a path to citizenship. We have 11 million of them. We have our own refugee problem we need to solve with employment. It teaches them skills, it teaches them ethics, it teaches them some values. I would never want to use the army, and I wish there were an alternative to it, but we need to put people to work. And I think that's something all of our societies urgently need. And education is not training people for employment, and that's the problem.
It's a great turnaround in the discussion with the person who started arguing that education is at the core of everything, would actually advocate employment opportunities at the expense of education. That's how interesting these topics are. So let's open up the discussion to the floor. Please try to be very brief so that we can make up a little bit of the time. I see a hand over there. Yes? Well, since you're sitting next to each other, can we take both questions at the same time? And please, I would ask you again to be brief.
I have a different question, I'm sure. I'm Petros Lalangas from the International Society of Naval Architects and Marine Engineers. I have a question for Mr. Papanastasiou. I found your graphs very interesting. However, I noticed you have not included Germany in your chart.
Deutschland, Deutschland. It was there.
Deutschland?
Yeah.
Oh, you had it as a D. I was expecting you to see it with a G.
Ah, okay.
because
I use the notation, the Eurostat notation, so that's why.
I see, because as we all know, they are the big financial winners in the European Union. So they are very low on the chart. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The gentleman next to you.
Thank you very much for the panel and for the organizers. My name is Gouda Abdel Khalik. I'm professor at Cairo University. I actually would like to invite everybody to think more fundamentally about the issues. We'll talk about inequality, poverty, and unemployment. And these are issues that basically relate to the youth. So it's a youth problem par excellence. And I don't think education is the answer, as Alan Goodman mentioned, because education is a public good. With this tendency to move towards a market economy, there is going to be plenty of problems down the line. And I think we better rethink the social and economic policies to start with. I'm not against the market economy. For I'm saying that, Alan Goodman said to the answer is education. I challenge this on two grounds. One, education is a victim in a market economy environment. Number two, highly educated people in the southern Mediterranean and also in this country are unemployed. So it seems that education is not, it is important, but it's not the answer here. And my call is for us to rethink public policies in this vital area. Thank you very much.
So Claire, the question is, should we think these issues more in a more iconoclastic basis than the one that we have been discussing?
Well, I think we've got to address really the scale of the problem. I mean, just looking at Egypt alone, just to stay still, I understand 500,000 jobs. Or is it more than that? 500,000 jobs a year have to be created just to stay still. This is for the new entrants to the market. And you're not going to do that by focusing on government policy and what governments can do. This is not the way, if you're in favour of liberal markets, there are different ways of running capitalism which could accommodate the social needs of Egypt or other societies through things like social enterprise, which involve a for-profit motive but reinvest the profits into society, unlike the shareholder takes all model of capitalism, which is, a few people who obviously have invested in the company in the first place retain the profits. So I think we do need to think outside the economic box, not by thinking in zero-sum games that we need to go back to socialist models where everything is managed by the state, because our populations are getting too big and too diverse to do that, and the demand for jobs is too quick. But there are, and I'm not saying the third sector is a quick fix either. I mean, there are other models out there we could go into, promoted by the OECD, for example, which is to link Mediterranean societies, particularly North Africa, into longer value chains. So we see evidence of this, not just multinationals, but for example, the Renault car plants in Morocco has involved outsourcing the manufacture of cars in Morocco, but it also is a way of transferring skills. So I think your question about should you pay for employment or education, actually educating people in skills on the job being part of the new model. That employers and investors should actually take more of the burden for vocational training. So it's not just the state that pays for it, but actually those companies and organizations that benefit from it. So there are several models, I could go into more. But the transfer of skills is a very important side of this. Thinking outside rather linear models that liberal capitalism has to be, as we've seen from the chart, just the Anglo-Saxon version, as opposed to a more social democratic model, which could be more adaptable to Mediterranean societies.
Thank you. A question over there, and I think there was a hand over there. You realize why we're saying rock stars wear sunglasses. It's not because they're cool, it's because they can't see from the lights in interviews. So I think there was a hand down there. So Stelios, and then, Mrs. Linou over there.
Yes, thank you to all the panelists. Two questions, one for Claire, the other one for Melissa. Claire, I'm glad you talked about merit. And I wanted to ask you, it seems to me that we look at these things with John Rawls' glasses on, that everything that matters is equality of opportunity.
Yes.
And that does not seem to work right now. And I wanted to ask whether or not we should start considering more seriously equality of outcome. That's the question to you. The one for Melissa is, you spoke about the inability of foundations in terms of monetary or financial means to solve everything. But you do know, because you're very experienced, that it's not only about money.
Right.
The influence that foundations have, it's much more subtle.
Correct.
And it seems to me that in many times we take a rather messianic approach that is like the approach that the way we look at science. It can solve everything. So we look at the way we can address problems and the solutions we can provide and our policy influence in a rather hubristic way, that we can do everything. We have all the answers. We can step in every situation, provide solutions, walk away, irrelevant of money. You have thought about these things, so what is your view about this?
First, Melissa.
You want to start with me? I agree with the points that you're making both explicitly and implicitly. Private philanthropy is about far more than its financial resources. A foundation is more than a cash machine, and a private philanthropist is also more than a writer of checks. Philanthropy has, as many of the panelists here have pointed out already, a unique capacity to highlight an issue, to bring stakeholders together, and to ask the questions that are difficult to ask in other contexts, especially the kinds of questions about wicked problems. To what extent are there issues of bias that prevent economic mobility, for example? So all of those are extremely important roles for private philanthropy. I do also think that in the current context, private philanthropy has a unique opportunity to play a different kind of linking role between the public sector and the private sector, because philanthropy kind of sits in this space in between. So I think all of those things are good. I think that foundations need to be more thoughtful about what their role is as institutions and not simply as providers of funds. And the power of foundations as institutions is something that needs a lot more exploration and attention in order for foundations to achieve the potential they have for being part of a solution to some of the wicked problems we confront.
Okay, just briefly, you've asked me about equality of outcome. I've been sitting here wondering what that looks like, because I think societies are inherently unequal. But what we could actually target is at least a minimum standard of living for everybody. So access is critical to healthcare, to the ability to education, to the ability for self-realization is essentially the social goal. What then happens, whether people use the skills they've got, whether they abuse their health, etc., is their affair, and that's why you end up with unequal societies. And I know in Europe, following on the Swiss referendum a week or so ago on there being a kind of universal tax credit that ensures every family, every individual in the country has a minimum income that the government hands out, whatever the going rate is. It was interesting, the Swiss rejected that for fear that it would encourage more inward migration, refugees, migrant workers actually trying to themselves benefit from this. But it has stimulated a bit of a discussion about the efficient distribution of resources. And if you do make sure that people are not on the absolute poverty line, that they do have the wherewithal, the springboard of life, if you like. So education, access to health, access to the workplace, I would argue, which is more meritocratic. I know that's a sort of equality of inputs rather than outputs argument. But if you give people those chances and that assurance, then it seems to me that the welfare state is doing its job. I think sometimes some of the arguments about the welfare state go further down the line, you know, sort of palliative care for people who are not taking responsibility for themselves. And I'm sorry to say, whatever system you think we live in, we do live in a globalized model which is based on capitalism. You can make capitalism have a softer face, you can regulate, you can equalize those things. But you also have to look ahead for people who are not going to seize the opportunities and say, well, at least the basics of life, education, healthcare, some kind of pension are all in place. And that's to do with the nitty-gritty of workplace legislation, etc. And where that line lies is the source of endless political debate in all our societies.
Excuse me, I want to add brief things, you know, because a welfare state, I mean, if it succeeds to reduce poverty, reduce it, I'm not saying eliminating it today, it will be, the burden will be much less tomorrow. Why? Because a family, usually the poor families have larger children, but say a family with 4 or 5 children today, and they are poor, you know, they are not educated, they are not educated, and so on. Those 4 or 5, now we were 7, the parents and 5 children. Tomorrow, next year, there will be 5 poor families with 5, which means 25, which what has been called the poverty multiplier. I mean, one family, if you succeed to erase poverty, from one family you're succeeding it from about, you know, to one family with 5, 6 children for 20 persons tomorrow.
So let's take 2 questions. It's Mrs. Linou at the back and the gentleman here at the front. And let's address them at the same time. Can you please go ahead with your question until Mrs. Linou gets a microphone? Thank you.
Communism failed a few years back because the top apparatchiks were stealing the money and the people were all impoverished, basically. So communism failed. Capitalism is failing because although it's a great system of creating capital, doesn't know how to distribute equitably that capital. So capitalism is failing. We see what is happening with the big chasm, you know, the rich and the poor, so it's not enough money to really go around and make everybody happy. So would the third sector, as you said, combine, of course, with the help of the second and first sector, eventually help incubate cooperative, so we will go into a cooperative capitalism, which is, it is the fairest way of creating capital because of how cooperatives are structured.
Right.
Mrs. Linou?
Good point.
Yeah, I only wanted to defend the issue of health inequalities, not seeing health inequalities just as inequalities to access to health, but more as inequalities in health determinants, social determinants of health, and how these can interact and be either key factors of causing unemployment or reduction at the educational level, or how the education and unemployment can affect can be the key social determinants of health. So how would you see that?
That's me.
Stefane, would you like to take the last question, and then we'll go to the formal question and close the session?
Is it possible to hear it again, because I didn't hear it?
Also, it was not clear.
Can you speak up, please, because I didn't hear it.
What I was saying is that the key issue in health today is not access to health services, which remains important, but how you modify social determinants of health. Because it's very well known that the uneducated, even within the same society, might have 10 years less survival than the educated. Or the unemployed equally might have a reduced survival just by the fact that they are unemployed. And the same goes for poverty. So what is the role of the third sector, of the philanthropy, to influence the social determinants of health and not health services per se?
So you want to focus on health, okay?
And I asked you to answer this because your answer, I thought, would be none.
Okay, it's no problem. If someone else would like to answer.
No, I'm joking, go ahead.
It's okay. Anyway, you're asking me about the causal mechanisms. Okay, is it, first of all, we have to identify some basic causal mechanisms. Education, employment, what else, social capital, connectedness, social connectedness, whatever, I don't know. What determines health outcomes? Is that your main question?
The question is that people with different backgrounds in education and income seem to have a much lower life expectancy. And what could be the role of the third sector in improving this situation, given that the welfare state seems not to have succeeded in improving it?
Send women
it depends on the words. Sorry, Alan?
Send women and girls to school.
It depends, it depends on the words of welfare. I mean, if you take the Nordic example, you see a high-quality healthcare system. People enjoy it, okay? On the contrary, if we take the example of the South European societies, we see that the healthcare system is fragmented and it's not well organized. It was never well organized from its very beginning. I believe that the third sector, the voluntary sector, in terms of healthcare, it has played a crucial role. If we manage to find a balance between the state and the market and the service sector, then the third sector, this is really crucial. And I believe it's an area, a field where the voluntary sector has to play a major role.
Claire, please, very quickly, on the cooperative systems in capitalism.
Absolutely. What, in capitalism? I was just going to say on the welfare issue, Panos and I have just been at a conference looking at, well, it was an international public sector reform conference where the session on the possibilities of digitization of the delivery of services being absolutely targeted to the specific needs of the individual. So we're moving away, that was a big debate, wasn't it? And being interactive as well. So we're moving from a system where welfare is offered, you know, the same thing is offered from the system to whoever wants to take it, to being very specific to the end user and the needs of those end users. We haven't got there yet, but I think that's the next stage of making more efficient use of public resources. As for capitalism, I already said there is more than one way to do capitalism. If the current model is making the rich richer and the poor poorer. I've got views on the banking system in the UK not being sufficiently aligned with the real economy, and there are discussions going on about reforming that so that there is, how should we say, a more equitable share out of the spoils of capitalism. But the idea that it's either capitalism or something else is a false debate. I think, as we saw from Thomas Piketty's book on the history of capitalism, there's been enormous responses about the accumulation of wealth and how it happens, whether it's through land, whether it's through, you know, existing models. We can modify the model to be more socially friendly, is all I'm saying. That debate still needs to happen.
Well, as you can see, it's just the beginning of the discussion. Join me in thanking our panel. Thank you. Thank you all.
Well done.
Moving on now to our next plenary session, number 5, the role of arts in a region of conflict. I would like to call on stage Mr. Robert Storr, Dean of the Yale University School of Art, the moderator of the panel, along with the remaining panelists.
In this room, so it's maybe a change of pace that people are unprepared for. Anyway, this panel will be somewhat smaller or shorter than originally anticipated because of the length of the previous one and because of the need to sort of catch up on the schedule. But what I'd like to do is the following, is to have a few questions thrown out, to have each person have a chance to step in from their position, what they do and how they understand these problems, and then we will then open it up to the House in general terms. I'll just say a few things on my own account. Basically, the history of modern art has been a struggle between the idea of art for art's sake and the idea of engagement. Usually the art for art's sake people are people who have previously been involved in complex social structures and found them inhibiting and decided to break away from the academy or from the mandates of their society, their governments and so on, and sought freedom in the arts and therefore sought to build a protective wall around the arts for that freedom. But then circumstances throw people into situations of crisis and they become politicized all over again. We're seeing that happen right now. So that people who previously had made work that may have seemed rarefied to the general population suddenly find themselves in circumstances where they are doing work in public ways and engaging the public as a medium or as a resource also. And that, as I said, is something increasingly happening now. What was performance art once upon a time, happening in small venues all around the world, is now happening in big places, like, for example, Tanya Bruguera doing a microphone event in Havana and being shut down by the government. Now, what I want to do is simply open up that whole can of worms and have people talk about that shift back and forth, who's in control of the process of reaching out to make art in public situations, and as I say, also with the public. There is much conversation about who has the right to do this. What gives any particular artist the right to enter into the reality of some particular group and make art out of it? Does one need to be a member of that group? Does one need to be close to it in any particular way? If that were the case, there are huge problems aesthetically with the limits that you place on what artists do. On the other hand, there are clearly cases of where people have done things that presume too much. And just the other night, I was watching an old Elvis in Las Vegas film, in which in the 1970s, Elvis sang a song about the blacks, the fate of young black men in the ghetto. Nowadays, that would be absolutely intolerable. It's actually a pretty good song. And since I grew up on the south side of Chicago and I remember hearing it at the time, I remember thinking, oh, finally somebody's written a song about this. So what we now think is acceptable was not acceptable once upon a time, or maybe vice versa. So all of these things are whirling around. And then the last thing I'll throw out there as a sort of general proposition is that it seems to me there is no question but that philanthropy has increasingly set agendas for artists. And the question is philanthropy changing the direction of art in a positive way, or is it luring artists down a series of paths that may not work well? And just again, autobiographically, I once worked for the Mexican mural painter Siqueiros. I thought I was going to be a heroic mural painter. It was not my thing, okay? Now, there are people who've made great paintings in that zone, and I don't dismiss that kind of art, but each artist must identify for themselves what their real vocation is. And one of the artists I admire the most is an abstract painter of American origin, Ad Reinhardt, who made very political art as a cartoonist, political cartoonist, and who made completely apolitical art as a painter. And one can also have a bifurcated identity, or even subdivided beyond that, of how you practice your art, who you think you are as an artist, and who people think you are as an artist. And I would like to just sort of throw all these examples out, boop, boop, helter-skelter, and ask sort of the general question of, do people think now that there is a bigger desire among artists than in previous times, or in recent times anyway, to engage directly in public problems? With this caveat, when the title of this came out, it is Art in Regions of Conflict. I would say that art is almost by definition a region of conflict. So if I can just throw that out, and whoever wants to grab the first loose piece of it.
Region of conflict, when I think of that, if it's more now than other times, I'm thinking of futurism. I'm thinking of European avant-garde as it's born on this soil, probably 3-4 hours away from Thessaloniki at the border of Greece and Turkey now. Adrianopolis is where Marinetti was volunteering as a war journalist before he was so astounded by the sounds of the war that he wanted to explode the graphic layout of his books and call for the sort of destruction of museums in his famous manifesto that was published in Figaro. And that's even, the relationship between media and art already started then at his time. And the same way I'm thinking of the Kostakis collection that is sitting now in Thessaloniki, I believe, which is such an important constructivist revelation. But to me, you said the art is a region of conflict. I mean, for me, art and the art world is such a forum for humanities. And there is obviously, it's a split world that we are observing right now. In the art world, there's a very sort of massive discursive turn where knowledge production is cherished, much more the market forces. There is definitely an interest in much more dematerialized experiences, the way you mentioned, performance, transmission of ideas, the way maybe closer to music, how emission of ideas can, the experience of art rather than the object of art, which is a split. And then of course there is a whole another world where market forces come in, within which we also see, of course, political statements or anti-market statements, but the relationship between art and market is a eternal story, so it's not a 20th.
Let's hope it's not eternal.
21st century, but the way I see it is the art world has become more of a forum, especially for the non-American context, where activists, where academics, where philosophers, where they find more home within it. In a way, it has become a much more richer place, and my job and our jobs is also kind of make sure that the very people and the places that offer sort of socioeconomic alternatives to the bottlenecking of humanities can be actually sort of, can find home within the art world. And that's a really interesting turn I find I'm sure in Greece, in Turkey, in Russia, in many parts of the world, activists feel much more home now in the art world, which maybe is not in the case of Museum of Modern Art, but definitely in the biennial circuits that you see globally. So that would be my initial commentary, unless you want me to keep going.
Just in terms of regional things and so on, I mean, you work at Vita de Wit, but you also have been involved in Turkey and so on. Now, do you think there are really dramatically different discourses going on in these places, or are they relatively meshed?
I'm from Istanbul,
Yeah,
and I sat in the Gezi protests. I left my job in Rotterdam and went to sit in the tents 3 years ago in Gezi, and all my friends who are being affected, artists or non-artists, are very much part of that vocabulary, which is a diminishing vocabulary, which is losing its media distribution, its media outlet, which is, I mean, I sometimes wonder why are we on the wrong side of history now that we're living in the age of thugs and bullies, whether it's America or Russia or China. But the question is also like looking critically of what art is doing and how art is circulating. Art is circulating in a very similar way how data is circulating or drugs are circulating, or sort of looking at the parallel narratives to please the economically inclined. You know, art is not some sort of dreamy space in a ghetto operating in its own dreamy space, but it also has functions of distribution and circulation that is very similar to other commodities, whether it's raw materials, whether it's water, whether it's cosmic energy, you know, it's all forms of circulation. So when you look at the story of art, you also have a whole way of rewriting the history of the world in many ways.
Jamie?
Yeah, so I think the three things that sort of come to mind for me, one, I have a different way into this conversation than I think the one that Rob laid out, and I've never understood the dichotomy of art for art's sake. And I always go back to the Somerset Maugham quote that says, art for art's sake is rather like drinking gin for gin's sake, right? And it doesn't quite make sense to me. So, you know, the artists that I know are human beings who live in the world. They, as human beings, are shaped by the world. Their work is shaped by who they are as human beings, and in turn, their work shapes the world. So it's just, that's not a dichotomy that I find helpful, thing one. Thing two, thinking specifically about this notion of art and conflict, I go back to an anthropologist called Alika Wally, who works at the Field Museum in Chicago, and she's actually found that both artist and arts participant function as master identities. So people who make art and people who experience art form relationships across race, across ethnicity, across country of origin, across gender, across socioeconomic status, and they create bonds that endure beyond the art experience. So that art is actually one of the most powerful ways of making durable bonds between unlike groups. So I think it actually has a very powerful role to play in the notion of conflict. And then the third thing that I would say is that unpacking the Elvis example that Rob laid out is, yes, there are aesthetic questions about a white man telling the African-American experience. In addition to that, there are power and economic dimensions of that, and the fact that he was creating art within a system that let a white man tell that story and that let a white man profit from it. So in addition to the aesthetic dimension, there's also very real power and economic dimension. So those are three things that I would offer to open up the conversation.
And since you're nodding actively, why don't you just nod in?
Terrific, I'm just nodding away. So my way into this conversation is actually by way of 5th century Athens. My project, Theater of War, presents ancient Greek tragedies about war to military audiences who've experienced war. And the idea behind the project is that ancient Greek theater, and theater in particular in the Western world, was born as a military technology, a vast, expansive public health initiative that happened to utilize the arts on a very large scale. So picture 17,000 citizen soldiers seated in the Theater of Dionysus during the 5th century BC, in a century in which the Athenians saw nearly 80 years of war. They're seated according to tribe, which is their military unit, according to rank, with the generals, the strategoi in the front, and the hoplite cadets in the nosebleed section in the back. And they're all watching plays that either implicitly or explicitly deal with topics that really only those who've been to war intrinsically understand. You have a view of one lens into what ancient theater was. So now fast forward 2,500 years, to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We, in the United States, had a cohort of tens of thousands of service members returning from the wars, struggling with invisible wounds, and really an unprecedented sort of problem on our hands. We also had more than 44,000 people coming back from the conflicts who would have died in any conflict prior because of advances in modern medicine. So we had this vast subclass of people who are neither well nor sick, but stranded on islands of chronic illness, who need to be brought back into the fold of their community. Well, the Athenians offer a model that we have lost touch with in the Western world, at least in the United States, I can speak for, which is about the communalization of the pollution of conflict by bringing the entire community together to bear witness to the horror, to the trauma, to the ethical and moral breaches, to the infighting, to the betrayals that are fundamental to military conflict and its consequences. So our work, we use the best actors in the United States and also now in Europe. We don't compromise on the artistic quality of what we produce. We do not aspire to be of the tribe for whom we're performing, nor do we exploit their stories. We perform the plays as a way of creating the context for a conversation that wouldn't have happened otherwise in the audience. It's really just a pep rally for a discussion that wouldn't have happened, where people open up, tell stories about trauma, about what we call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, suicide, the impact of war on families. And now this work has grown to 15 other projects that all use this idea, this methodology, that ancient stories and ancient plays in particular can be used as public health initiatives to deliver one fundamental message, which is if you relate to anything in these stories, you're not alone. And you're not just not alone in your community, as evident by the conversations that occur because of this intervention and because of the performance, but most importantly, you're not alone across time. And what we see night after night is palpable relief in audiences that discover that. Audiences who've experienced war on both sides of the fence. We've performed this work in prisons, homeless shelters, mental institutions, addiction clinics, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, for the guards, the CIA. We've done it for people in regions of conflict in Europe, in Japan. And everywhere we go, you know, at least I'm reminded of the unique power of theater as a technology, as refined as Athenian architecture, as a 5th century art, as refined as the political systems and legal systems that developed during that quantum leap that happened humanistically during that century, as refined a technology as there is, for delivering an experience that, as Jamie articulated so beautifully, is boundary dissolving, that dissolves the boundaries between those who come to see it. And so that's how I entered the conversation. Some people have questioned whether our work is ethical for all the reasons you've laid out, and we can talk about that if that's of interest. And of course, this question of arts for art's sake is something that fuels my desire to make sure that the experience we're delivering is the highest quality artistic experience while simultaneously delivering the social impact that we hope. And so we have now 200 actors who've participated in our projects who are all very famous, who come back to the work time after time, because it's very rare in our profession to feel like you're doing anything that's of social meaning with your craft. And to see the palpable benefits it has on a community brings this group over and over back to be deployed out into the world in various places. So in a nutshell, that's my response and my way in.
Let me take another tack. If I understand it from yesterday's conversation after the film that you showed, you've also made a film about Kafafi. And Kafafi was one of the more solitary artists. I think Pessoa, Fernando Pessoa, the artist from, the poet rather, from Portugal, is another example of these extraordinarily solitary figures who make entire universes in small, exquisite works of art. And when we say art for art's sake, it doesn't mean necessarily some kind of rarefied, aristocratic thing. It is simply that to dream itself is a kind of freedom, and that you can make a small artifact that is available to everybody should it find its way to them, or should the viewer find their way to it. and that is itself a kind of liberating act. And I wonder if you could talk about your interest in Kafafi, about what his role is now, because certainly he's much more widely read now than at any time that I can think of. There are about 5 translations in English.
Yeah, and the new one is Daniel Mendelsohn, is it?
Yeah.
The New York Exquisite, actually, a translation where he's managed to capture the cadence of the language and the rhythms of the Greek. He's actually transported that, transposed that into the English language. It's no small achievement on the part of that particular translator. I mean, when we're talking about regions of conflict or whatever, it's not just a geographical thing or left, right, or whatever. I mean, Kafafi is actually working in Alexandria, late 19th century, early 20th century. He's discovered by Foster and stuff like that. But his region of conflict really is his sexuality. I mean, he's the first contemporary, we would say, literary figure who's completely open about his sexual identity in a very parochial, closed, petit bourgeois, Alexandrian kind of diasporic community, and an enormous sense of kind of isolation. And he's writing this sort of stuff, which for me is an incredibly kind of political act, as well as an act of very high aesthetic kind of quality. And he's completely alone. He comes to Athens in 1903, and he's more or less kind of like ridiculed, in fact, by the literary establishment that prefers this enormous kind of epic, grandiose national narrative. And he's writing in a very personal, and his own kind of Greek, actually. It's a mixture between contemporary spoken Greek and a kind of form of katharevos, archaicized Greek, you know. So it's this incredibly beautiful language, and he's really totally on his own. It is art for art's sake. It's a form of kind of presumably psychotherapy for this civil servant working for the water supply ministry, I think, in Egypt, some whatever. But the reverberations of his work over the last century and a half, I think, is quite incredible. In terms of the role of the artist, whatever, I really am very much about, you know, the artist has to be completely skeptical and critical and oppositional to any forms of power, for me. No? Whether that is mainstream kind of power, whether, you know, that is if we're talking about the presidency of the United States or the government in Greece or whatever, or the police or but also power, anti-power. You know, many times the forces that revolt against this power, many times within those forces, there are kind of reactionary sentiments, and there are kind of, you know, and I think just to go along with that, just because, you know, this is the popular will at one particular point in time, is not necessarily a liberating experience, either for the artist or politically. No, we've seen this in the Arab Spring, no, where this enormous kind of hope and stuff like that was actually frustrated very, very, very early on, and very kind of reactionary, misogynistic, kind of reactionary, you know, anti-gay, whatever sort of stuff was coming out, you know, very anti-democratic, anti-kind of bourgeois democratic kind of sentiments. So in a way, not all reaction against power is necessarily progressive and is necessarily healthy or good. You know, and as artists, we should never be carried away by that. You know, we have our own unique voice, and if we're honest to that, I think we can only be honest to that. I mean, a very brief example, I've done in the last 15 years in Greece a trilogy. I think I finished my cycle of work in the Greek language. I started off in England in the queer movement of the late 80s and the early 90s with Jarman and Julian and all these other people. No? I moved here because I wanted to transpose that kind of aesthetic experience into what I saw was happening in the Balkans, which very much I thought was the front line. After the fall of the communist regimes, this massive kind of, you know, influx of different populations from the east, from the north, and whatever. I found that the body of the immigrant, if you like, very kind of seminal in terms of my work. That was criticized in Greece when I first did the film From the Edge of the City, which was work with kind of basically lumpen proletarian kids from Kazakhstan who'd come here as, you know, after the breakup of the Soviet Union. No? What right do you have to speak on behalf of that? I don't have any right to speak on it. I mean, I actually just lived with these people for a year, these young guys or whatever. They trusted me, and we did this film together, right? So that was my way in. It wasn't about me speaking. And okay, there was a kind of investment, you know, an emotional investment, but that was my take. The second film in this genre was a film called Hostage, and it was based on a true story about a guy who kidnapped a bus and taken all these people hostage, and it ended up in Albania with a tragic result. He and this Greek passenger were killed, no? Enormous kind of outpouring of rage, What right do you have to do this? You know, how dare you show Greece in a bad light or whatever. Incredible outrage in Albania by the film and the kind of political establishment. How dare you show that this guy has been raped? You know, the idea of male rape. No, this is a complete no-no. No? So in fact, you're getting it from all different sides, you know, the criticism. The last film, The Spring Awakening, is a film which I think is completely goes against the whole crisis narrative that we've been fed and kind of fascinated in Greece for the last 5 or 6 years. You know, the Germans as the wicked, kind of, you know, this replication of the present crisis as a replication of the 40s occupation of Greece by the Germans. No, in effect. The film was kind of, you know, like it died. So I think one's independence as an artist is, and perspicacity to see, okay, through official power, but also through the narratives which are ostensibly against power as well. That's my position.
I just throw out that it's odd, it seems to me, that we value the imagination, but then when somebody imagines something that is quote unquote not theirs, the imagination becomes immediately suspect.
Yes.
It's one thing to question the way in which somebody who does not belong to a particular community or whatever it is imagines, but it's ultimately what the imagination is about. It's about taking yourself out of yourself to someplace else. And I think all criticism is fair, but a priori condemnation, because one is not a member of a particular group, defies exactly what Jamie's talking about, which is this ability to dissolve boundaries, to place oneself outside of one's own world, and to welcome people from outside of one's own world into one's own world. Could you talk about your project with Asylum in Pittsburgh, and talk a little bit about Pittsburgh too, as a place to do it? Pittsburgh is kind of the Thessaloniki of Pennsylvania.
An hour in an airplane and 7 hours in a car southwest of New York.
Yeah.
Since everybody knows where New York is. And we're an hour or a mile from the center, a 20-minute walk from the center of the city in a tiny little neighborhood. It is a very mixed neighborhood, high incidence of poverty at the same time. It has a well-developed, sort of preserved neighborhood that's very historic. Our mission is not to create art per se, but is to provide sanctuary to writers who are persecuted in exile because of their writing, particularly their literary writing in our case. So we're a platform for making sure that their voices are not silenced by exile, and at the same time creating audiences in our community for a complete variety of artists who may be from many, many countries, in a community where the city has 4% non-native born in the entire city. So we're a city where essentially racial identity is the only difference other than economic. And there's a high correlation of socioeconomics and race. So our community is roughly 50% African American, 50% white, 30% below poverty in wealth. So our mission is to, which we accidentally discovered through the power of art. When we began, the first writer was a Chinese writer who had been in exile, not been allowed to publish, and he'd been in prison for long periods. And when he came, he put his poetry on the outside of the house. And as you can imagine, in a neighborhood where there are a lot of abandoned homes on the street, it created some attention. And people began to ask, what is that? And he began to perform his house. He was a great reader of his poetry. Anybody would come by, he would go, it's only 2 words that he knew, okay. That's 1 word, I guess. And he would perform and act out his house. And it began to get attention. And so we started to roll with that, what was happening, because we really hadn't intended to do anything other than provide sanctuary. And we created a set of programs that dealt with literary-based performance, readings, authors, and eventually jazz and collaboration. And we had a couple, I would say, core commitments. One of them was we changed our program, which originally provided economic stipend, housing, medical benefits, translations, help for the family if there was a family, from a limited program to one that had no limits. We took away all the borders on that side. And for audiences, everything is free. So we have total access. And a lot of our performances are on public streets, in vacant lots, gardens, so that the public feels in our community that this is part of their space, part of their performances. And what we found is you can very much underrate the imagination of people in a community where there's almost no presence of other languages. We have people reading in Mongolian in public. You name the language, they've done it. And when I cut back on some of the poetry or jazz poetry last year, I got complaints that that's why people came. And so we've seen then, to go to the other point of artists representing communities, clearly the community where people come from, there are a whole set of issues of how you communicate and how you communicate back. Within our community, though, we've done a series of projects dealing with everybody from communities of disability, refugees in our city, and we have artists work with them. And in many cases, we might use focus group transcripts unedited, so the artist samples from them, but doesn't write the language, but begins to assemble dialogues of people who do not communicate with one another, who are on opposite sides. Maybe one may be a fair housing advocate, and may one be homeless and living in the YMCA. Another may be a historic preservationist. They're in these songs talking to one another, and in the audience, listening to the people have dialogue. And for people with disabilities, we did a project with a director from France who had something called the Micro-History of World Economics Danced, which was essentially an economic lesson, the history of economics, and how we got to the point of crisis with 50 people with disabilities and their families, service givers, writing real-time text. He did writing workshops as part of the performance, and being recognized as real actors, real performers, as integral to the performance, not as representing disability, and but talking about crisis in human life and human scale. And eventually, the whole community kind of begins to embrace the values of free expression and creative expression, which are deeply embedded in US values to start with, but tend to be forgotten in many ways and taken for granted and cheapened by sort of self and commercial censorship. And we did a project with the writer from Venezuela who was in exile with some artists that the community picked from a set of proposals, which I poo-pooed. I thought this was really stupid. And I tried to get people not to do it. And it was called River of Words. And some Venezuelan artists, the novelists picked words from Venezuelan poets and novelists. They fabricated them in various fonts and materials. And we threw parties and invited people to give a home to a word like we give a home to a writer, and the artists would put them on their houses. So we threw these parties. They were really popular. People loved it. This was supposed to be temporary. So they said to the artists, can we keep these forever? We like our words. They would argue about, this is me. I'm a vortex, people say. So they say, fine. The words go up on the houses, and I get a letter from the city about a month later saying, who gave you permission in the historic neighborhood? This violates all the standards. You're going to have to take these down. So I said to the city, they're not ours anymore. Don't bother.
You should have said there's a word for that. And then
yeah. And they said, don't be cute. And so I said, how about if we compromise and we tell people they've got to fork over $100, go down and have a hearing at the Historic Review Commission, and bring some neighbors and testify how these are positive, et cetera, et cetera. So we write the letter to everybody that said, if you're in it. So one person's a lawyer. Well, the community association rebels. They say, these are our words. This is what our community is about speech. The historic preservationists say they're fine. They're historically okay. Some journalists who live in the neighborhood begin to give the finger to the city in their articles in the major papers. So somebody goes down who's a lawyer who has a word on his house and fights the case. The city says, maybe we got to send this up to legal. Come back again in a couple months. A couple months go by, have another hearing. So they punt, and they say, community, come back to us with a standard. And we will then review the standard, which was several years ago now, which was a way of saying, let's let these words live, and we don't want to have to change an official ruling. So now we've got a community that has adopted these values because people have come in, and it's become integral to the identity that communities who are different can be learned to have dialogue together and not always agree. I mean, because these are very sometimes volatile. And to sort of bring it around, the second writer who came to our program was from El Salvador. He wrote a book called Senselessness, which begins with a novelist who thinks he's got a really cushy job. A friend of his says, come on and do a hack job on these manuscripts for us that the churches put together on the Guatemalan massacres from the Indians. They were translated, and we just need someone to brush them up. So he gets about a paragraph into it, and the phrase, I'm not complete in the mind, occurs. And he goes into a delirium. And the whole novel comes from this delirium of languages that can't be translated, massacres that just take over his imagination, and this idea of writers being able to engage in that central space that's not their own space, but translating experience, I think is integral to the imagination in artists, and it can't be denied. And to say that there's high art, low art, is one of the jazz musicians says, they're all on the plate.
With that as a segue, if we can go to Amel, and this was her video, and she was in it several times. And if I am correct in seeing what I'm seeing, there are patches of music in multiple styles. And the fact that you as an artist, as a singer, as a composer, impersonate what looked to me like sort of 1930s Egyptian cinema in one case, or in another case, it's hip-hop style and so on. This ability to sort of morph and also to use music television as a medium for talking about larger issues is something that interests me a lot, because when we talk about art in relation to regions of conflict, we tend to talk about some version of the official art world. It could be theater, it could be the art market, it could be this. But this is an area which is open for all kinds of interventions. And Amel speaks French, understands English, but speaks French, so we're going to have to do this in translation.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ahmed, and it means hope. And today my quiz is with my English. So I hope you will understand that I have to switch to French sometime to be more precise. What I have to say today is the crisis of an artist is not to be in crisis. So the crisis motivates and frees sensitivity. For example, for me, the crisis appear like this. يا غربتي في بلاد الناس جميع من يجوز يقول أنا براني. So this song talks about people who are exiled and outside of their countries, and for me, the exiles can be geographical or can be physical, but the worst one is to be exiled in its own society. Donc, je vais switcher au français pour parler un peu de l'exil. Pour ce qui s'agit de l'exil, c'est comment aujourd'hui un artiste se sent exilé dans sa propre société, ne se sent pas compris, se sent à côté de la marge, c'est-à-dire qu'il est à un moment donné confronté à une dynamique sociétale qui active à contre-courant. Et c'est là où devient l'art un moteur intéressant, une thérapie, une interprétation d'un message artistique et aussi sociétal qui engendre justement le déclic pour le changement.
What you would like to say is that actually sometimes the artists feel marginalized from their own society, from their own community, so they feel that they go against the wave, and perhaps sometimes art is a way that they can express themselves and in some cases also create a new wave and go against this wave and become the driver for a change.
Yes. Et puis pour ce qui s'agit du public, donc le public commence à prendre confiance dans l'œuvre artistique une fois qu'il se sent, qu'il se reconnaît dans l'œuvre artistique et qu'il se sent justement acteur principal de cette œuvre même. Donc l'artiste va raconter les souffrances de ce peuple, va aussi raconter les tabous d'une société, les problèmes sociaux, les traditions, hein, tout ça. Donc le public s'attache à l'œuvre artistique et responsabilise justement l'artiste autant que porte-parole de son message et attend beaucoup de choses de l'œuvre artistique. Donc aujourd'hui, moi, en tant que jeune de la nouvelle génération de la scène musicale algérienne, je me sens un peu responsable de porter un message d'une société qui est en pleine dynamique et qui est en plein changement. Et je vous laisse... Oui.
Please correct me if I remember
yes,
everything.
Yes.
So at the beginning she said that the artist, the public gets a habit of the art and the artist, and so slowly gets acquainted to this and then accepts the art. And at the end of this process, the artist, through his art, will give the responsibility to the public, will express their needs, their taboos, their problems.
Mm-hmm. And the artist became an actor of the changement, and it's collaborate with the artistic production and to make the change in the society. And qu'est-ce que je pourrais parler de la vidéo donc qu'on a vue, c'est les exemples des artistes nord-africains. Donc je voudrais aussi citer le Arab Spring, donc, qui a touché un peu nos pays africains tels que l'Égypte et la Tunisie.
Say a few words about the video we just saw. It's about various artists from her region. It's all somehow inspired by the Arab Spring.
Yes. Donc, comme vous avez vu pour la première, c'était Amel Metlouti qui était un premier personnage de la révolution tunisienne et qui a porté fort justement le message de la liberté d'expression et de son engagement pour le changement d'une dictature et pour plus de liberté dans la société.
The first artist was from Tunisia. He was one of the first persons to take up also during the revolution in Tunisia, and what he expressed was messages from the freedom of expression.
And now his song Kalimti Hora, which means my word is free in English, became a hymn of the Tunisian revolution. I can, for example, talk about General Lebled, a young rapper who talked about the situation in Tunisia too, and he expressed his disagreement to the president, and he will incarcerated for 3 days because he put the video in YouTube. I can talk about Rami Aissam from Egypt with his song Mahnash min dul wala dul, which means we don't belong to them. C'est-à-dire, on ne veut pas qu'on récupère notre révolution, on ne veut pas qu'il y ait une mauvaise interprétation ou carrément une récupération politique de notre investissement.
So what he wanted to say is that we don't want
Turn the mic up.
So what the artist would like to say is that we don't want to change the meaning of our revolution and not be misinterpreted.
Yes. For me, as far as I'm concerned, the topic I do in my work is to talk about the freedom of speak, the women's rights, the identity. I talk about the generation gap. Je viens d'un pays qui a été colonisé pendant 132 ans, qui est l'Algérie. Le peuple a donné de son sang pour avoir son indépendance en 1962. Donc,
She comes from a country which was for 130 years a colony, and only in 1962 became an independent state.
Et juste après l'indépendance, l'Algérie n'a pas fini son combat, donc elle est rentrée dans d'autres mouvements de résistance, tels que le Berber Spring en 1980. Et le Berber Spring, c'est un mouvement de berbères qui justement exprime par l'œuvre artistique de Ma'toub el-Wennas qu'on a vu dans la vidéo, qui raconte donc cette appartenance à cette identité volée de tout le territoire nord-africain, pas que de l'Algérie.
But the story of her country doesn't stop in 1962, but there have been other conflicts during the coming years. One example is the Berber Spring,
yes.
the Berber Revolution.
Yes, in 1980, with Ma'toub el-Wennas, who wants to make the Amazigh identity official. He was assassinated in 1995, and today the Amazigh language is national official language in Algeria.
Okay, I'd like to throw out something more general conversation. When you spoke, you talked about the avant-gardes of the teens and 20s. There was also a whole other set of avant-gardes in the visual arts and in the performing arts in the 60s and 70s. And most of them chose the path of austerity. The denial of pleasure was their means of countering what was thought to be bourgeois artistic standards, right? And it was an act of taking away from arts things that were too easy for the audience to enjoy without being critical of society. But in regard to what Constantine was saying, one of the artists I admire the most is Felix Gonzalez Torres, who was an American-Cuban artist who figured out that the best way to be radical was to create pleasures that people didn't know they wanted and that understood only after they were in the process of savoring them. Literally, he would make pieces out of candy, and people would eat the candy, and while they were eating the candy, they would be informed that this represented the body of his lover who had died of AIDS. Now, I would like to talk about the change in attitudes towards the politics of pleasure, the insinuation of meaning into things that are easily enjoyed but hard to think about, and how that as a strategy for the politicizing of art has grown.
That's all you.
I mean, it's split worlds again,
yep.
Because, you know, there's so much politics that's embraced within the art world. And that's what I mean is artists identifying an issue and an urgency, then creating a whole group of communities and stakeholders around that issue, and then galvanizing a whole discussion around that issue. So it could be in the form of an archive that has never existed for Tibet, or it could be a project, a research project that was 10 years ago in archaeology, which was covered yesterday. You know, should we cover up the excavation sites? I mean, this is a discussion I've been following in the art world about 10 years ago, which I'm sure in archaeology it's been forever, it just came up again yesterday. Or it could be a parliament that's being built at the moment by an artist in Kurdish part of, in Rojava, in Kurdistan. So artists are very much involved with the urgency of the now and immediately responding, but there are also other artists who completely work with aesthetics and beauty, and somehow tangentially riffing on the pleasure idea, I guess, which is...
Or maybe not so tangentially, forbidden pleasures.
And it's you know, working with the politics of NSA, but completely presenting it in a gorgeously seductive object form, in a way, in a museum setting, to the point that some artists would say, oh, he's selling out to the politics of, or to the world of, pleasure. Or, you know, artists who look at the dynamics of warfare from the Belgium to the African colonies, or artists who look at, you know, fiber optics politics under the water between continents, artists who look at Djibouti military training camp of CIA and so forth, in a way that it only goes to the collection of Leonardo DiCaprio. So, I mean, there are many, many contradictions that need to be kept in mind when trying to make sense of the art world's undercurrents, and I don't need to tell you that because you know it more than anybody. You should be a speaker here rather than a moderator. I think that's kind of the extent I can go into the domain of pleasure, given how politically charged everything else is for our world. I don't even know where I would be able to start with that question.
The only thing I might add is I am not aware of any forces that work on artists that don't also work on every other member of society. So when Amal was talking about feeling marginalized, I think there are many people who feel marginalized. I think the difference with artists is that they are bringing symbol and sensation to what they are experiencing. And when we're thinking about conflict, I think we're often talking about social change. And when we're thinking about social change, there are 5 S's that I think are part of that. And the first 3 are symbol, structure, and scale. The first 3 are structure, scale, and system, right? System, scale, and structure. And we all recognize that, and that's how many of us operate. The magic that artists bring is bringing that symbol and sensation to make something that makes intellectual sense all of a sudden make sense on a gut level. And I think you've experienced that in your world. Psychologists and doctors can talk about what the men and women who've been in war are feeling about, but all of a sudden you take a great playwright, an addict playwright, and they're able to sort of bring system and structure to it. So I think, so again, it's that artists, I think, are able to bring something to the table having experienced the same things that all of their other colleagues have. So that is maybe what I would throw.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that 2 sides of my mouth. On the one hand, just narrowing the focus of what I do to, say, public health. I mean, one of the principal objects of our work is mental health, around which globally there's massive stigma. You know, how do we break down that stigma? In the communities in which we perform and work, there's a pervasive view that anyone who suffers from something, mental health issues that result from trauma, it's a sign of weakness. It's something we've, in the United States, have culturally conditioned. All kinds of arguments that sort of victimize the person who's experiencing the trauma. So if we're going to affect major change with regard to mental health and stigma, we have to mainline it in a way that can be consumed by a mass populace. So our work, we're actually collaborating with a video game company on a project that would include actual psychological consequences to gameplay that involves warfare. Now, that's nefarious sounding. The United States Army had a recruiting video game called America's Army that utilizes some of the same technology. But if we're going to actually affect whole-scale public health change with regard to how people view the consequences of warfare, we have to work within forms that can be consumed on a mass level. The flip side is the work that we do resists consumption. So we deliver in the theater an experience that's so jarring, so horrifying, so hard to consume that you really can't, it's totally inappropriate to do what my actors do in the commercial or nonprofit theater. No one would necessarily pay money to have that experience until they've had the experience of communalizing it, of a community coming together. So it's both. I mean, I think in the theater, I can speak only to that. Most people go to the theater. I mean, I've spent some time in Greece this year, and I think I could say about my experience in Greece the same as I can in the United States. For the most part, to feel more intelligent than they actually are, to be congratulated for their own political beliefs, to be part of a community of people who are all consuming this particular art form together. So what is our responsibility as theater artists? You know, we want to continue to engage a large audience, but simultaneously are we simply just making things for people to consume and derive pleasure from? And how do we, you know, social impact seems to split the difference. If we can affect change by delivering pleasure, then maybe that's, you know, the best of all worlds.
I'm not sure I understood the question, actually.
Go ahead.
Could you just repeat the, sorry.
Repeat my question?
Yeah.
I can't remember which question I had most recently.
Something about seduction, I think.
It's about the politics of pleasure, basically.
Right.
There has often been a kind of puritanical attitude towards pleasure among people who are proposing radical rethinking of the world. And pulling back and denying pleasure to audiences was their way of disciplining those audiences.
Well, kind of Spanish Inquisition.
On the other hand, pleasure itself is a subversive tool and is sometimes...
Totally.
So.
Yeah, all art has to be seductive. I think, isn't that the key in the success over decades, over the last century of Hollywood, the absolute seduction of, you're creating a new series of gods and goddesses, and they're called stars, and you go into this like enormous black space, dark space, and you fall in love with these people. That's seduction, and that's part of that's the ultimate seduction. You create a love affair with these movie stars or whatever, and that's the power of it. I think there is space, I think, for stuff which is very, very harsh and very minimal and very austere. But that's also a seduction in a different way. It can actually work as a seduction at a cerebral level, yeah? The whole idea of less is more, the whole idea of denial. And you can get into that kind of trip as a form of seduction. But clearly, I think, from, the most ancient statue or the most ancient kind of relief to the most contemporary form of digital cinema or video art or whatever. If there is no seduction, I don't think there is any possibility of that thing being called art or it actually functioning on the viewer. That's it.
Okay, in the interest of time, because we're a little behind, I thought maybe we should now open it to the floor for people to ask questions that they may have. I might have one more, but I will hold my fire until you have had a chance to speak up. Somebody? There's one over there, and there's one over there, so.
No.
There we go. Hello. Yeah. So I really enjoyed. I'm going to slaughter your name because I wasn't here at intros. Maybe is it Daphne? It's just okay. Easy enough. Thanks. So I really enjoyed what you were saying about the struggle of trying to make art accessible with issues like the NSA and political issues. I think an example that I enjoyed, just a very quick statement, was Jenny Holzer's work with Protect Protect. I thought that blew my mind. But I think for a lot of us that are kind of in our channels with our work internationally, we're kind of, it's like our music libraries aren't as cool as they used to be, and we're missing out on a lot of great experiences. Are there pieces that are as engaging or more engaging that we should check out on these kind of really heavy social political issues that you feel are successful? And that's really for the whole panel, but I've been starting with Daphne because I thought she kind of hit the nail on the head with the NSA.
I think so. And what's happening, I run a space, and my mandate is to support projects that are beyond the white walls. So when artists are operating in that in-between space where philanthropy should probably kick in much more and research and identify those projects, and there are foundations like Prince Claus Fund and so forth that go into that space. I find it interesting to identify and find artists and support, which is sometimes not really part of their regular work either. An artist like Paola Pivi, who you can find in every institutional setting or in every other art fair and so forth, when she comes up with an idea that doesn't fit within that matrix, but that is actually a total social justice project or a massive cultural heritage project. Those are the projects that we should really identify and look and support. So that's where, there's a project called Silent Academy by an artist, Kurdish artist from Diyarbakir, Ahmet Öğüt, which is making use of all the skills of the legal migrants in the European cities, or also in New York now. The taxi drivers who happen to be a lawyer or a computer programmer, every man of the day that we get to chat in the taxi, but making use of their skills because nothing wrong with being a taxi driver, but life kind of took them to that destiny, and he's kind of creating academy to tap into their skills. There are projects, and I would like to actually see even more.
Tanya Bruguera also has taken on the whole question of immigration as a social activist. Yeah. So.
Just two super quick ones. There's a visual art collective called Ghana Think Tank, which is doing some of the most interesting work I've run across. And in the theater space, there's a theater collective called Rimini Protocol. And specifically, they've done a series in different cities called 100%, and then the name of that city. I saw the one they did in Philadelphia. They've done it globally, and it's probably the piece of theater that stayed with me most. So look them up, and I'll let them speak for themselves.
And one thing I want to add is also what you said, Konstantin, which I find the queering of politics, or looking at political mechanisms and challenging them. And obviously that is one of the ulterior motives of many, many artists. But on the other side, when they don't have the media outlet, or when the media is clamped, let's say, within their respective contexts, and when they cannot circulate their ideas because they are not connected to institutional networks or media networks, that's where we should also play more of a sensitive
Well, even if they are connected to these media outlets and whatever, sometimes, there's a kind of a silent censorship that comes into play. So someone who may be established or whatever at a certain point is considered maybe beyond the pale.
And that's also where philanthropy could make a difference, because there's almost no support for art writing and for the ways in which interpretive exercises can get out to a larger public. Most of the writing that's in the mainstream press now is about prices. And it doesn't do any good whatsoever for the general viewer who's saying, what is this, why is this, what's going on, who's it intended for? And, one of the problems with art is that artists must choose their audiences, but if those audiences are blocked because they never hear about it,
Well, part of our mission is to actually translate the work of the writers in exile and to make sure they find audiences. So we work with publishers of translations. We have a magazine online that now has worldwide contributors of exiled writers to get their texts into print and interviews, and so they can find publishers, and in effect building our own market system of distribution. And it is really important to do that.
There was somebody's hand raised over here, and I don't know whether they're still. Okay, now please.
Hello to all of you. Thank you very much for your inspiring discussion. I would have a question and a comment at the same time. Yesterday we heard extensively the use of the term narrative. If we recall Harald Zeman, an outstanding curator and art historian, we might remember his exhibition of 2003, Blood and Honey, The Future is in the Balkans. In terms of narrative, it remained quite unfulfilled and underdeveloped since he died some 2 years after the show. And in any case, it would be a narrative or a discourse, if you prefer, of 2003. In 2016, and after your discussion, the narrative or discourse, or how we may call it, seems much more complex than the one based on the notion of conflict. In that sense, which would be the keywords of the reality, of the current artistic reality that is of interest to you? Maybe which would be the keywords of the current sensations that artists bring and are of interest to you? Thank you.
Who would like to grab that one? I'll have something to say on this one, but before I open my mouth, anybody else want to jump in?
No, I would defer to the curators.
I mean, I think problems are much more hidden right now and much more structural and not as visible and easily identified as they used to be years ago. And I'm also talking about asymmetric warfare, and I'm talking shadow finance, which came in Andrea's statement yesterday, and so forth. So it is also much more invisible than immediately addressable.
I just say for myself, and it's at a different level, if you will, of the topical issues of warfare and hidden finance and so on and so forth are very big and very real and very worth making art about, and sometimes the art that's made about it is really good. But there's another simpler proposition which I extract and probably creatively misread that comes from Mikhail Bakhtin, who is the Russian literary critic and thinker, who basically said that all art is dialogic, by which he means basically it arises out of a conversation between parties. The general understanding of this is that it's a conversation between the reader and the author, but it begins in a conversation that the author has with him or herself. And it begins, therefore, in a disagreement within the author. The author argues back and forth with him or herself about issues of concern to them. And what they then do, and usually he talks about Dostoevsky creating characters that represent these opposing points of view, and so as you read a Dostoevsky novel, you listen to these arguments, but they're all projections of an internal contradiction, disagreement, discomfort, whatever you want to call it. And I think basically art offers the occasion for people who are convinced that they must have a position to realize that actually all positions are contested, and they're even contested by the most verbally skilled or pictorially skilled of people, and that what you want from a work of art is not the answer, but rather a better level of argument than you're able to create for yourself, giving you therefore a model of how to do it.
Walt Whitman said we contain within us multitudes.
That's right, yeah.
And I think that you can also then begin to look at the reader or the audience from the same perspective. And this goes to maybe sweetening a little bit, but it's an inversion. During G20 in Pittsburgh, we had 17 exiled Burmese monks with us. And they were going to do a prayer march into the center of the city where all the presidents were meeting. And we didn't have a permit. So we walked in, and it was basically an armed city. There were police on mounted horsemen, busloads with all the, because it was right after Seattle. And everywhere they went, people were coming down off the horses, the police taking photographs, and it became a piece of performance art. And they didn't know they were in performance art. We didn't know it until it began to happen. And so the whole meaning of this completely changed. They sat down and did a 45-minute kind of prayer outside the convention center where everybody was, and everything stopped and became quiet in that environment. So this idea of the audience beginning to then embrace other points of view and containing within multitudes, I think, is also the audience learns to do that as well.
And I think it affects, I mean, MoMA was invoked, and since Jamie and I both worked there, and since it's the mother of all museums of modern art, almost in a literal sense, genetically, it's also an easy target. It's easy to make fun of. But the truth of the matter is that when I go to MoMA, I don't hear the authoritative position of modern art. I hear a whole bunch of artists arguing with each other about what modern art ought to be. And so when people go there, they should not be going there as a treasure house or as some kind of religious experience or whatever. They should feel like they're entering into that argument. And they can also begin to think that it doesn't matter what they like and don't like. It matters the quality of the argument that they listen to and that they participate in. And one of my experiences as a curator is that people start out hating something and then they come back to it over and over and over again. The number of people who start out by thinking Warhol is the absolutely bottom of everything and then end up finding that Warhol is actually kind of brilliant is significant. The number of people who look at white paintings and think there's nothing there and then keep coming back to look at them is also a case of that. So if we think of our cultural institutions that are heavy, if you will, as being not so heavy after all, they're there for ordinary people to enter into the argument and then participate in that argument. They're forums, they're not treasure houses.
And the only thing, just not to keep beating a drum, but at the moment, MoMA and most museums, at least in the US, are inviting in that debate and argument among a very narrow band of voices. Right, so there's a very narrow band of the spectrum that's invited, that is canonized and said this is the conversation to which everyone should be entering. So MoMA and all the museums are making great strides, but I think we need to be aware of how much of the debate is actually housed within those marbled walls.
And they're managing the debate because they're giving voiceovers so that people don't even have the chance to have that primary experience of being estranged, confused, and having to figure it out for themselves. They're being told right away what to think about things because the argument is that that is more democratic. It is less democratic.
For those poor white men who get to hang
For anybody,
on those
for
walls.
anybody.
Right, those poor Bissett.
Yeah.
One of the questions at the center of my work is whose stories are these? What I love most about Greek tragedy is if you do it right, if you direct it right, then everyone is right. Everyone is justified. Every character in a Sophoclean play is perfectly justified in what they're doing. So our next big project this summer is August 6th. We're performing Antigone with a multiracial cast in the church in Ferguson, Missouri, where Michael Brown, who was gunned down by the police 2 years ago, where his memorial took place for 2,500 people. And the audience will be split between the African-American community and law enforcement. And the governor of the state of Missouri is committed to bringing the law enforcement community in. And the choruses of Antigone will be sung by a split choir of the gospel choir of the church and the St. Louis Police Choir. And the idea is not about coming at race from the front, because that'll never work in art in the United States, but to talk about what happens when personal conviction and state law are opposed and violence is going to ensue one way or the other, and talk about as a community how do we avert that violence. We're not hoping for a kumbaya moment where everyone holds hands. We're actually just hoping that people, for a brief boundary dissolving moment, 45 minutes after the performance, can hear one another's arguments without it becoming an incendiary shouting match, which is what most town hall discussions are, at least in the United States.
Yeah, Constantine.
Just going back to the your previous question, which I'm a bit slow on seduction, and
I just talked
so
too
I'm
fast,
going back there really.
Slow seduction.
So I've kind of been slightly filtering this word. I remember the Susan Sontag article she was writing sometime in the 90s. She wrote that article about the difficulty of the modernist project, somehow, and how the audience, in terms of architecture and in terms of music and all that, in a sense had rejected the kind of the difficulty of the modernist project, or the post-war modernist project. Do we think that this is true, or have audiences become a lot more sophisticated? Has this modern art, like in terms, I go to the Tate Modern, and what I see is really, instead of people in England, which is a very secular society, instead of going to church, they go to the Tate Modern, and they enter these buildings with the same kind of reverence that one would enter a medieval cathedral.
Which is all wrong.
Which is all wrong. I mean, I'm just wondering, that whole thing around the modernist project, do you think it is actually more accessible to in the age of Netflix and in the age of YouTube and whatever, is that more accessible to a mainstream audience? Or does the mainstream audience just really still want the good old, which I think is fantastic, narrative, and not the anti-narrative? They don't want the kind of, the romance of the early 60s in France. They don't want last year Marion Bad, because it's still kind of, but he should be over there, not here, in the editing, or what, no?
But I can't resist saying there is no modernist project. There were modernist projects, plural. Yeah. And modernism was an argument about what modernism should be. And it is a triumph of one or two critics in the 1950s to persuade people that this all added up to a streamlined
You don't like
package.
Greenberg, I guess, right?
For example.
Right.
For example. And I think we should disabuse ourselves of that and just drop it, right? And go back to the idea that none of the modernists agreed with one another about anything very much. And that was what was exciting about it. And being a member of an audience in which you listen to really, really smart people and talented people argue is a privilege. And it is also a way to hone your own skills in that very department, and not just in art. I don't know, is there anybody else? And otherwise I think we should probably wrap it up.
Yes,
because
they want us to send people to lunch.
We want to send them to lunch, yes. Okay, good. Go.